Let's do that one. Classic.
Yeah, the classic.
Okay, so we have this. Okay. Yo guys, Theo here, Uncommon Sense. And we're back with another one of the Uncommon Sense conversations. This was supposed to be a bigger thing. I just had the one guest in Swedish, svag till stark, Amanda Essen, and then the first few guests were, there were some scheduling issues, and it kind of, as we say in Swedish, it just ran out in the sand. But now I'm here with a guest face to face. It's my good friend, Sim van Daele. Yeah, he just coached me on the pronunciation. I've said a Van Daele all the time. But yeah, so we're going to get into more about who you are. But yeah, good to be here with you, bro.
Yeah, it's my pleasure being here.
Yeah, so just introduce yourself real quick to the audience and then...
Yeah, so I work as a high-performance coach, been based out of Oslo, will actually move back to Belgium, and been doing, like coaching in various aspects, right? So as a personal trainer, as a Krav Maga instructor, as a more of a high-performance coach with a holistic angle for the last, it's in total now, give or take 11 years of coaching. So, yeah.
Awesome.
That's where we're at.
Awesome. So we're going to get into some topics. Obviously, the stuff that we do aligns pretty well. So we're going to be talking about fitness, health, fasting, obviously, but then also the Stoicism stuff and masculinity, and what your experiences with autism and trauma and the states is going to be a big one. You know, you've been keeping up with the channel lately. I've been mentioning the states, but I always ask people this because you told basically what you do, but I want to know who are you. Yeah. So this is the question I'll always ask everyone: what is your origin story? Tell me your origin story, and then just take it away.
Yeah. Okay. So my origin story is. As I've told it many times, right? Some people, I guess most people find it interesting, but a lot of people have preconceived notions around the terms that we'll use, like autism. So I'm gonna, as I get to that part, or as we get to that part, I'll do a little bit more elaboration. Right? But for now, for the sake of storytelling, right, we're just gonna continue. So actually, going all the way back, being born. My mom already knew that something was off, right? She's had another child before. She was like, okay, this child has something that isn't like the other ones. And she was a kindergarten teacher, so she sees a lot of children, right? So, and having that experience, she kind of intuited that okay, there's whatever is going on with this kid it's not the norm. The thing is that it took a really long time to figure out what that was. So over the years, because I got diagnosed in when I was 11, over the years, so 11 years of basically different type of therapies, different type of some psychologists, some relaxation therapists, anger management therapy, this type of stuff. So different type of sociological deficits that they were trying to make up by doing some it's not necessarily a therapy but counseling, right? So it's different than therapy in that sense. And yeah, so there was a lot of this that it was obvious as I was growing up that there was a lot of differences in just the way I thought about things, the way I acted, the way I presented stuff. So kind of, fast forward to when I'm 11 and they just kind of the autism thing wasn't very big back then. It wasn't as common as it's becoming more common now for various reasons.
That's getting some mail. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, weird. And so what happened is when we got the diagnosis, so you go to this center that does these types of things, right? Which is actually just aimed at diagnosing people with autism spectrum disorder, right? So there's already this connotation in autism spectrum disorder that the emphasis should fall on disorder, right? So a lot of people have these preconceived notions about what autism is and what it can't amount to or can amount to, right? And the thing is, if I be that blunt, but there's a lot of arrogance in the way that's being like, oh, you can't. No, like that would mean that you know every physiological thing behind what could, go from that point of having autism to not having autism, right? So the term that's often being used is like, oh, you cured it or you present it that way. It's like, no, there's just physiological changes that happen both in the body and in the brain that allow for that thing to dissipate. Because if we say cure, it's a disease, but it's not a disease, right? There's definitely lots of neurological changes that take place, and then the majority of the research points out that these are de novo. So de novo is like Latin for new genetics. So it's not it's not like it's impossible, but it's very unlikely. It's not something that is perpetuated down a genetic line. It's not something like, oh, I got it from back and like, right? So
he had an autism gene.
Exactly. There isn't an actual autism gene. Like there might be, maybe it would be like 1% of the cases, probably even less. But it's epigenetic changes to the environment. Lots of different reasons why that's the case. Majority of the time, it's heavy metal exposure is one of them, which leads to like neurological deficiencies. And then on top of that, like gut dysbiosis is a really big one, which also leads to neuroinflammation, and that stunts neurological development, which also leads that they have like autists as a whole. And there's a lot of different papers on this, research papers. You can go look it up if you like. How much of the mineral and vitamin deficiencies, especially mineral deficiencies, or especially actually both, is as a population that they're deficient in is astounding. It's almost all of it, right? So if you look at it, like it's especially all the B vitamins that have to do with cognition and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff around that, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, brain wiring can change, right? Because the brain is plastic. So a lot of that can be mended. And so the people that use like, oh, you cure, and all of a sudden you're going to think like everyone else, no, there's still a unique brain architecture. So
exactly.
I would never think like a quote unquote normal person.
Normie.
Yeah, exactly. But what has happened is that it's no longer disordered. It's not necessarily disordered thinking as much as disordered behavior, right? And the only way to explain that, it's like there's no distance between you and the world. If there's an impulse, and it doesn't matter what type of impulse, it could be light, it could be sound, it could be tactile, so sense, it could be anything, right? There's a hyper reaction in correspondence to the stimulus. And that's what we would call like disordered behavior. And you see a lot of this amplification, right? States we'll go back into later. But like fight, flight, and freeze. So they would either get aggressive, they would try to run away from the stimulus, or they would freeze, literally, like block, right? And I experienced a lot of that. I don't remember as much, but from the recollections that I do have and what my mom and my family told me, right, it was a lot of that type of stuff. So the stimulus comes, you freak out, or I freak out, right? And that's just what we would call that disordered behavior, which is an amplification of the sympathetic nervous system, because everything inside physiologically is fucked up, right? So that's the short summary. And then through a lot of the practices that will dig into. Then I've changed the physiology, the nervous system started healing, then the brain started healing, and then by what you do, depending on your own profile, if we can call it that, a brain profile, neurological profile, you balance out your hemispheres, or you balance out your brain halves. And when that's the case, a lot of this disorder also dissipates, right? So that's where a lot of these people, again, like, can you cure it? Like, it's not something you cure. It's like a physiological issue. It would be like, more towards if we contrast that with something like that's, kind of broken in the physiological sense, right? Because there's a lack of these nutrients, there's a lack of resources, a lack of energy that go into these things, so the brain can't build itself, right? And then once you give it the opportunity to do so, it just rebalances, is probably literally the best word. It just kind of heals itself, quote unquote, which it does. And then the disordered stuff goes away, right? Because your nervous system is both software and hardware. And I'm not sure how much sense this is going to make to a lot of people.
No, but it's super interesting, but it is quite high level stuff.
Yeah.
So if we just to keep it simple a little bit, like we say, what is autism? If you do a short description of that.
The shortest description I can give is basically more towards what I said. Like, it's an amplification of the nervous system and an inability to deal or cope with stimuli. And that goes into literally this disordered behavior. Like, a normal person would react to a stimulus in a very non-reactive way, and that's not the case with autism. Right?
Okay.
Generally.
And so if you were to cure it or like make it not disordered, really, what are some steps, or what are the steps you took to do that?
So one of the main things, and again, because, harkening back to that thing about vitamins and minerals, is that the nutrition needs to change, because a lot of it is neuroinflammation that's happening. So what happens with inflammation is that these minerals and vitamins can't be taken up, can't be used, and a lot of the neurotransmitters are thrown off balance. So anything you would need to heal can't be used, right? It's like if you were thirsty as hell, but your mouth is sewn shut. So you would want to, but you can't. So it's nutrition, it's sleep, because a lot of brain repair happens in sleep, or actually most of your brain repair happens in sleep. Sunlight, right? Fasting has helped me, and it has helped other people. Contact with nature, because there's a lot of that, right? Where the nervous system balance and brain balance is also dictated by spending time in nature, right? So there's both studies done with, like, kids with autism spectrum disorder in nature, and that the symptoms, they didn't vanish necessarily, but they got better. And the same with when they're out in water. That also helps.
That's funny. My brother is autistic. The water has always been a big thing.
Interesting, right? So that's where this whole case was like, if autism didn't have these biological parameters, then environment shouldn't change it, right? And this is a big one when they speak about autism. Like, it's almost like it's set, but it's not, right? Because again, if it was set, then it should do the same thing in every environment, but it doesn't, right? Because then changing diets wouldn't work. No. But it does.
And this is so interesting, because, I don't, in this particular conversation, I don't really want to get into my personal experience with, having it in the family and stuff like that. But in general, I've been in contact with stuff like this a lot. And no one thinks that you could treat it or make it better by changing nutrition, getting sunlight, maybe trying fasting or all this. So it was fascinating to me to see that part of your story when I first found you,
And the movement is a big part of that as well, because a lot of neuromodulation, so literally just like how neurochemistry works, brain chemistry, changes according to exercise, right? And even meditation, breathwork, all of these practices combined change your brain, and everything changes your brain to a certain degree. That's, a fundamental biological thing: breathing, right? Movement, nutrition, sunlight, etc. So yeah, and it's one of those like big things where I found it interesting, because it's not like this research is sparse. It's actually quite present in the literature, and it's been for quite some time. And one of the major cases that they made was like gluten-free and casein-free, because of the
I remember
having such a big inflammatory effect, and any inflammation in your gut is neuroinflammation, and especially with people with very sensitive guts, which is what happens in the development, with childs in the womb that tend to get autism or any other neurological deficit or, quote unquote disease. And that just makes them really sensitive to certain things in food and even in the environment. So that's, all of these things combined, right? And again, the nutrition thing is kind of so well established that I thought it was ridiculous that when I read it, what is like 4 or 5 years ago, where I was like, okay, it's so established in the literature, but it doesn't make its way to people.
Seems like, again, no one seems to know this.
No, not really.
I mean, I guess I heard about the gluten-free stuff, but that's it basically.
Yeah.
But okay, but so tell me more about like what your life then looked as a, I don't know, I guess adolescent kid or young adult before you managed to.
Yeah. So what it looks like is, it's a lot of literal and figurative hand-holding. Because people with autism, because there's no space between them as a person and the environment, they don't deal with unknowns or uncertainty very well. So everything had to be prepared in advance. Like, we're going here. This is what is going to happen. It's gonna look like this. You'll probably experience it like this. These are the people that are gonna be there. You see what I mean? Like, that's the figurative hand-holding. Like, I needed to be prepared for anything, or like for everything we were going to do in advance. There couldn't be like any surprises. And even if I kind of was prepared, even if it was just too much stimulus, I had to like go, or I wanted to go home, or like I would start, you know, again, in going into fight mode, I would get like angry, or go into flight mode where I was like, okay, now I need to leave, or you go into freeze, and then that was just typical like blocking, like you can't really, or it's not like I can't speak, it's not that physiologically it's taken away of me the ability, but you just lock down, right? Like it's too overwhelming. So that's mainly the thing that tended to happen when we were out doing things, where one of these three things would happen. And if I was just really relaxed, because, you know, the environment was familiar and the people were familiar, then generally it would be okay. But that's kind of what like most of that time looked like, and it took it took a lot of work from my parents, right? Because it took a lot of work from the teachers, took a lot of work with the counselors, because your head is super chaotic. So the counseling was like learning how to, and I know it sounds silly, but learning how to bring the right books for the right day of school, and making sure that I had the right stuff in my backpack for school, because I would just be so disorganized and chaotic, right? It's what was going on in my head that I just kind of missed the boat, right? When I come to school with the books from another day and stuff like that, right?
One question: did you have something that you were kind of the opposite with? That you were like kind of obsessed and extra organized.
So that's the interesting thing. The paradox, right, with people with autism is that they tend to be hyper focused on singular things, or hyper obsessive. And like for me, my obsession was basically just in like media. So like things like gaming and movies and TV shows, where I would remember every detail, like, and even plot lines and the actors and everything. But I couldn't remember what I learned in school yesterday, right? So it's like a selective filter in that, like, and there's also, you know, in that spectrum of people, like people with a higher intelligence, which I fall in, and then of course like people with a normal intelligence, it's actually less of this obsessive stuff. So it kind of comes with the territory.
But okay, so what I want to come to is kind of like, because people like you and I have similar stories, you know, like we were in a way, we were not doing that great, you know. But I didn't necessarily have autism, but then there was this change, you know, and that's kind of what I want to come to. Where's the like... do you have, because I have this very clear before and after in my life, and it's the panic attack story. And I've told the story so many times, you know. Do you have like a point like that? Yeah,
so there was a point, I think because it's such a long time ago, it's hard to pinpoint the exact age, but I remember the exact time. And that was, so again, somewhere between 19 and 21. And what had happened is, like, with the trauma, like abusive alcoholic father, right, both psychologically and physiologically, and then like I just got into a lot of the unhealthy habits, right, a lot of eating, a lot of sodas, so just eating junk food. So I gained a lot of weight, and then I came to, you know, see a picture of myself gaining this weight, and I was like, oi, this is not good, right? And the way I thought I looked and the way I look, it's a complete opposite, complete disconnect. So then I started moving, and then I started changing my diet, And then I noticed that the autistic tendency started to diminish. And that was really fascinating because you kind of live in that contrast where things that would otherwise trigger me stop triggering me.
Do you have any example?
So definitely in terms of stimulus, like I said, like either like too much noise, that would really make me very uncomfortable. So going more towards flight, that I had to leave a place. A lot of this type of stuff, a lot of people and a lot of noise. That's something that I just couldn't deal with whatsoever. And I started noticing like, that's becoming less and less of a problem. And the unknown, because I had to change school and that would have freaked me out. But I just kind of like, it's this novelty is not a problem anymore. Or it's still uncomfortable because I'm not used to it.
But you're expecting to kind of freak out.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't. Like, there's none of these freakouts because a lot of even if I wasn't freaking out, there would be like high resistance to doing things. It would be like, fighting and like, no, I don't want to go. Like my parents had to like literally drag me to things. Literally. Like, no, you're coming with us, like out the door, right? We're going. And this was like some of the bigger changes. And then there was like a real tipping point when I was already doing way more movement and my nutrition had improved and I was doing a lot of the calisthenic stuff outside. So the sunlight and the movement outside and just being in nature because it's a relatively nature-filled area. And then like I just kind of, it's weird like that, like the contrast in the beginning because you go from like, I sense the diminishment, but then you come to a point where like, some of these things are gone. It's so weird.
It's funny because I never considered myself having autism. I mean, I had the ADD diagnosis. I guess, they're related or whatever. But it was a similar way for me that certain things that I had big problems with, like for me that I talked about on the channel before about stage fright and stuff like this, all of a sudden kind of like, I don't think I feel these things anymore. And I didn't go into... It was, of course, just a panic thing. I confronted that, so I didn't get the panic attacks, but I was still, like, not feeling great. But I was so motivated at this point, okay, I got the worst part, actually got better. What more can I do? And I also started doing more movement and improve my diet, and all these things just kind of go away, or at least become way less problematic.
So there's that's the difference between, like, would they say, like, your autism is fully gone, like, the disordered part of the autism is fully gone. You see what I mean? That's
the point. And I want to make that clear for anyone watching that, has some kind of experience or relationship to autism. It's not like, I just removed this thing out of me. It's like, the problems associated with it.
Yeah, exactly. Because then I started doing this stuff.
One thing. That's someone who's like... not as high functioning as you were still. You talk about high intelligence and stuff, which you are very intelligent. But so even that kind of person, they would still make more obviously than you would be, maybe be different still, but they would not have these very strong responses to stimuli and stuff like this, right?
So this is one of the things that, like, even in people, like, it doesn't really necessarily matter where they fall on the intelligence scale or their functioning scale. It's actually just that the behaviors, right, the disordered behaviors get better because... See, that's the thing, like, autism spectrum disorder is a collection term. It's not specific.
No, exactly.
It looks very different from person to person. It's highly bio-individual. And that's also meaning, like, people that, like, are further down that spectrum, that have a lot more issues, that doesn't mean, like, it doesn't, guarantee that everything will be gone. But that's not the point. It just needs to be either manageable or better. Right? So that it doesn't become like as it was for me and a lot of other people on the spectrum, like that it would, be debilitating. You couldn't live your life. Because my parents were looking for assisted living for me by the time I got to like 18, 19, 20, that I, would be taken care of, that I had someone with me. Right, which is like, to me, it's super weird right now, right? But that's if they draw at that line, of course, like that's what you're planning for in the future, right? And that's kind of the point. Like somebody that's further than I was on the spectrum, or is further, then it's just kind of like, okay, like, don't expect to snap your fingers and everything is gone, but you can diminish a lot of it.
Exactly. And I think this is just a general thing. When you get caught up in, this is the problem, I clearly can't be cured, fixed completely.
Yes.
So you don't see that there's something in between. Like, you can maybe make it manageable. So yes, you are still autistic. It's just that, like you say, it's not debilitating at all.
Because some of the things that happened afterwards are things that no quote-unquote normal autist would do. Like, I went to a metal festival with, like, I think it's 180,000 people alone. Right? That's like, ask any normal autist and they don't want to leave the house. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just not these types of things. I went to metal concerts alone, parties alone. I went, like, partying with friends. Like, and these parties, loud music, lots of people, and I just had a good time. So, I even moved to Norway alone, right? So these are not things. So if they would retest me, there's no indication of the disorder in this. Yeah, my pattern recognition and, like, focus on details, this type of stuff still persists, which is quite common for people with autism.
And that's all just a superpower, really.
Yeah,
right?
Now it comes without a lot of the, or it comes without the debilitating stuff or the disorder stuff or any of the behavioral, mismatches, let's say. And that's kind of, like, where the contrast grew. I kind of know that, like, now I want to go alone to loud places with a lot of people and do novel things, right? Where before that was just completely not the case.
Okay, very cool. So let's talk about your coaching, the stuff you do now. So you coach high performers, but let's get into what that means and what you do. But kind of tell us a little bit about, like, the journey to that point.
Sure. So the journey to that point also kind of began when I tore my ACL in my knee. That was shortly after I turned 21, or around that time. Anyway, right, the exact date, it doesn't matter.
And you're 31?
So 10 years ago. And then what happened was I was already doing Krav Maga. I had a P3, which is a practitioner level 3, which is like what you're,
And what is Krav Maga?
Sorry. Guys, people that don't know, Krav Maga is an Israeli self-defense system. So it's not a martial art technically, but it's martial arts as a grand term, right? But it's based on and based in self-defense. And P3 is, like, basically like a yellow belt in karate or like a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
So it's the first, the first grade is P1, then P2, P3, which is what I had when I tore my ACL. So what happened was I couldn't train for a year, but as soon as I could ride my bike after the surgery, I would go to every training session just to watch. And that's kind of where I was like, now I'm not in it, I can see the mistakes happening, and I would sort of assist. I would just kind of like go, think about this and think about that. And then I kind of caught that bug, because then you see someone apply the feedback that you've given them, and, like, my dopamine circuit in my brain was like, bing, right?
Very rewarding.
Exactly. Something happened here, right? That's really cool. And then I applied to become a Krav Maga instructor. So then that's what I did. And then you start learning how to instruct people, right? Which is very different from coaching people in that sense that you just kind of tell them what to do for an hour, and that's, that's it, right? Like, it doesn't have a lot of depth to it.
Is it like leading a group training class?
Yeah, it's like leading a group training class. There's not a lot of individual depth to it. It can be, right? But it just generally doesn't have that.
No, you can't do that for every person.
No, exactly. Because, like, classes is like, 20 to 30 people generally, right? Depending on, of course.
It's going to be difficult to give everyone the individual adjustments that they...
You give some individual adjustments when you see it, but again, like, it's very superficial.
Yeah.
Not in a bad sense. It's just, like, you can't go that deep.
That's just...
There's just no time. And, like, it's a big group. Anyway, and then I also started, like, doing a lot of the street workout calisthenics stuff. So, training outside. And I was like, teaching my friends, like, you know, how to do like pull-ups and like how to write programs and like working, like giving them plans for their nutrition. And then like that kind of like became the thing. Where it's like, oh, like I want to coach people. So then I got my personal trainer certificate, and then I literally harassed sats in Norway with 12 males over the course of a year, and then I finally got an interview, and I was like, all right, like it looks like I'm flying to Norway.
So you never had to get a license, or
a license? Yeah, I got a certificate, but not a license.
A certificate from.
Well, the Belgian government, I guess it is, that they hands these out when you complete the PT education.
Okay, but so you did that.
Yeah, so I got the PT, the personal training certificate.
I was just jealous if you didn't have to do that.
No,
I felt,
you have to.
Yeah, but I felt like, you know, that I'm just paying for this education so I can get the paper, so I can get the job, because I had already learned a bunch of stuff, and I learned much more when I was a trainer, training people, than I actually did from the education.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But, like, I mean, this isn't to rip on the Belgian government's, the way that they do things, but it's not like that education was good in any means. Like, I was already doing a lot and reading a lot, so I had, a lot of that already, right? It was just, like you said, like, this paper confirms that this stuff that I know already knew, and and then the rest I just learned from, you know, doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
So then I worked as a personal trainer for 3 years and a half at Satsuli Plus in Oslo, and then I just kind of came to the conclusion where a lot of my clients weren't really progressing the way that I'd like them to, right? That's what every PT wants, right? The results. And then I was like, okay, there's, you know, then you question them like, okay, how's your nutrition? And like, how's your sleep? And all these other things. And I just kind of came to the conclusion that like what they needed was like lifestyle changes. Yeah. Basically.
It's kind of hard to do as a PT in the gym, right?
Yeah. Because like, I mean, there are PTs that can do this, but I didn't feel like I could, right? Whether that's self-limiting beliefs or a part of the environment or both, right? It's probably a mix of both.
Sure, but it's also the thing, like they have the PT hour with you in the gym, and then you can actually like be there and make sure that they do that, right? But you can't just take how much time outside this and be checking in on, are you eating good? Are you sleeping? You know?
And that's part of the perception, as you said, like coming in, like people are looking to be trained, literally, like on the physical level. It's not like they're looking to be coached.
And also they maybe don't quite understand the importance of some of these things.
Yes, so. And I didn't at that time also like know how to explain it. And it's not like everyone needs, you know, the deepest biological, mechanical explanations. It's just like I wasn't there yet in terms of my own understanding. Intuitively, yes, but I just couldn't make it known, right?
Sure.
And then I just kind of came to that conclusion, which is like the quote, like if all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. And then like I've just been trying to use training like physically as like the hammer, right? Like let's use that to solve all your problems, and it was clear that wasn't working. And then I was like, okay, I've been using everything under the sun, right? Fasting, cold exposure, movement, meditation, breath work, etc. So I was like, maybe I should just package that and use that as a means to like get people, right, to experience different things that will allow them to change their lifestyle at the end of the coaching trajectory. And that's kind of how I landed coaching high performers. Yeah. Because then it was like a former client that I was training physically in SATS, and he's a high performer, and then like I just kind of...
And so, really quick, what is a high performer?
Okay. So a high performer, I would say, it's my definition, right? It's anyone that is in a leading position generally, right? But that has a lot of pressure and that with a lot of stakes. So generally a lot of money is involved in that, where it's like, you know, businessmen, CEOs, entrepreneurs, hedge fund managers, right? Top level managers, this type of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was, or was, he still is, he's still alive, right? He is this, somewhere, like, he owns several businesses, and, like, it comes with a lot of different pressures, right? So we found out, as typical for a lot of high performers, right? The sleep was just poor as fuck. And then his nutrition was a complete mess. And he didn't feel very good, right? Because why would you when you're not sleeping well and eating well? And then, you know, other issues in breeding. So there was some repatterning that we had to do as well. And then, yeah, like just kind of like, okay, let's fix that. And that's kind of what I do with these high performers, right? It's like, we're sort out your biology. You'll feel better, and thus you will perform better.
Okay, I understand. I'm going to go and check just that the technology is running all right. But please, like, just tell, like, if you get a new client, kind of, like, what do you do with them? Like, what does a protocol look like, or something?
Yeah. So the first thing is that, like, when a client signs up, is that we go through a pretty thorough assessment, a very thorough assessment. Actually, it's a lot of. So we go through everything, like how is your psychology, the sleep, nutrition, movement, like how many times a day, how many times a week do you want to train, right? All of these types of things. And just kind of figure out where they're at with their nervous system. So we test that. We figure out how does your metabolism work, right? So I ask them, like, deliver me the blood work. We go through a special assessment for the nutrition. We go through an assessment for the movements, right? We check everything. And then from there on out, it's like, depending on the person, usually a lot of these high performers are like, yeah, I can handle a high load. And then I send them a program, and it's like, oh, bro, this is super overwhelming. Like, yeah, well, you lied to me, right? No,
it's usually those kinds of guys will put their thing, that you know, because with that, they can handle extreme loads. They sacrifice the sleep and the food and everything, and they can keep it up, but they're not going to feel great. But so anything else is like, oh.
And it's like, as you can say, like, handling load in that sense is very specific. And they kind of extrapolate that to this thing, and they find out that it's not the same because a lot of change has to occur. There's also, so then it's kind of figuring out what type of person is this, right? How do they function? And then I can make a protocol based on that. And like now as I've matured, I know how to like take it a little bit slower. So yeah, like I know how all these things connect, but if I give them everything at once, even at the lowest level, it's still very overwhelming for these guys, right? So instead, like, it's kind of like step by step, right? We'll first of all, generally, like, we'll work with sleep, right? Then I'll do stress and nutrition. And then we'll evolve more towards like movement and breath work and all this other type of stuff. So that's, the protocol is like written. It's like, you know, let's fix your sleep first. Let's work on that. And then I'll start adding in like smaller things. If they're better at, you know, handling some of this lifestyle stuff, then maybe I'll give them like, okay, think about this on your nutrition, think about this in sleep, think about this on stress, right? And then the next phase, right, is like if they've adapted to all of this and it's better, it's not like we make it more complex, but it's like now we go one step further, right? Because it's a process of change, right? It's not like you snap your fingers and I gave you a little bit of sleep hygiene stuff, and all of a sudden you sleep like a rock star, right? No, that's a process as well.
Yeah, it can also be the thing that when you yourself, I was going to say, are a high performer, but I mean, then I kind of mean on the health and fitness, all this stuff. Then you of course you understand if someone never went to the gym, you're not going to put them on a 6 workouts per week thing.
No, exactly.
But you kind of still, because you do so much yourself, you think that we're starting out real slow here. It still can be very overwhelming to a person.
Yes. So you kind of live in your own bubble, right? And I've adapted to this lifestyle, right? And it's not exactly like they're copying my lifestyle, but biology is still biology. You still need to sleep according to day and night cycles. You still need sunlight, right? You still need to have enough animal protein and stuff like that. So some things are just the way they are. But yeah, like I reason from that maybe too often. There's no maybe there. It's just too often where I'm like, oh, it's, you know, so self-explanatory and self-evident.
Yeah, it's the thing when you know a lot about something, even when you know you're talking and trying to explain it or to someone that doesn't know as much, you get like blind spots because some things are just so obvious to you.
Yeah.
And then it's good, you know, when the client or whoever you're talking to knows to ask the right questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I've been many times when I have a client I'm working with and they ask me something, I go, they didn't know that. Then I'm like stupid that I started talking about all this. Let me explain this first.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's been the major challenge in this type of work is that with these people you kind of quite often you start from the bottom, level 1, right? And then maybe I'll start giving them things at level 5, let's say, just to use that analogy.
Sure.
And then they're like, oh, but you know, like then they start, as you said, like asking these level 1 or level 0 questions. I'm like, oh shit, my bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I started at the wrong place, right? It's an assumption because of my own bias or my own journey or my own experience and knowledge. So. Yeah.
I'm a bit lucky in that regard. It's like, especially the fasting angle, a lot of people find me because they already know some about fasting. It was most often, at least like on my content online, I wasn't the first person they heard talk about fasting, for instance. So often I have that going for me. I don't have to explain everything about that. I know there's some pre-existing knowledge there. But so that's smooth. But one thing, so to make it all a bit more concrete, like I know the stuff you do, it's like the sleep and you improve their nutrition, you get involved with training, breath work, cold exposure. And so what kind of, to try to make it a bit more just concrete, what happens for these people? Like what types of changes do your clients experience?
So one of the major changes is the first one is always like they feel more energized, right? And that's great, right? Because if you don't have any energy or like on a fundamental level, life is energy. No energy, you're dead, right? It's super simple. So they start experiencing like more energy, and the subsequent thing is that they start experiencing focus and clear-headedness. All of a sudden they're like, oh, like I see this much clearer and I can I'm making these connections that I've never made before, and I'm able to be more focused, like have a longer attention span, be way more in depth with the things that I'm working with. I'm less distracted, right? And everything just feels smoother, right? It's like opening up a tight muscle before you go train, right? It's like your movements get smoother, and effectively their psychology as a software, as we can put it like that, runs better, right? Because we decluttered everything in the hardware.
And so since these high performance performers are already performing highly in this one area, like where do they like see, you know, I understand the software is running more smoothly, but how do they start performing better in other areas of their life, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, because the biological carryover, or it's a psychological carryover based on the biological baseline, meaning that when everything else improves biologically, like your stress regulation, it just means that has a dramatic effect on dealing with their partners, dealing with your children, or interacting with. It's a bad word, dealing. My bad, guys. Right? Interacting with. Right? So you see that the carryover is to a lot of the social stuff, right? Where they're like, either they're putting better boundaries, they're communicating better. And one of the things that gives me the most pleasure is that they're able to connect better with their spouse, with their children, with their friends, right? And that's one of the feedback that I've had the most.
Okay, so basically the kind of person, their business or whatever is their everything, but it's because of that, not everything else has been all that great. And so you basically make these people be able to have good relationships with people in their lives. And
it's just kind of like getting all your ducks in a row, right? A lot of things, as they say, like fall on the back seat, right? Or get kind of cast aside, their health especially. And then it's just kind of like me coming in, and the health is the stepping stone or the fundamental basis of everything, but that's where everything else blooms from, right? And then it allows them to, kind of come back to what's important in life, right?
And it is, to me, with the things I've done, it's so obvious too that when you have these, your sleep is good, your nutrition is good, you take care of yourself, you train, you get the sunlight. Yes, everything. That's why it's kind of hard sometimes to communicate what kind of change you will experience. Like, what can you do for me? Like, everything. Think of anything you're not, feel like it's not going too well for you. Yeah, that will go better if you do these things.
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of the benefits are just there, right? If you feel more centered and calm and energized, and there's, a lot of, as I would say, like distance again from the stimulus or the inputs, then they just handle things much better, right? Whether that's like, anything that goes wrong with the business or the pandemic, one of my clients handled that expertly, where I was super proud, and I still am. He was just kind of like, it didn't really affect me. I mean, down the line, like it wears everyone down, so you get some stress, but he didn't like completely get overwhelmed or drop the ball or like made desperate decisions. It was super calculated and just, made the right decisions. And that's something very typical in what you see in high performance, right? It's all like, let's go. These important decisions need to be made all the time. And if you're, desperate, quote unquote, or in a stressed state, like you'll miss some information and you start making bad decisions, right? Especially in the fintech world, right? And in finance. And the more you're able to like self-regulate, just meaning like to self-control the emotional states and the stress, right, the better your behaviors or your responses to these types of situations.
All right. Very interesting. I'd love to get into like every single aspect of the things you coach. I don't think for this conversation we can get into all of it, but something, because it's a big one on this channel, of course, the fasting. So I'm going to interview a little bit about fasting. But let's just give me your general take on the fasting, because you've used it yourself, right?
So in that sense, I think fasting is like medicine, right? And everything depends on dosages, right? And this is just the case, like it's about finding the right dosage for you. And let's be honest, it takes some experimentation to find out, right? And so
you can't know where
exactly
the right dose.
So for me as well, like I've had to experiment with everything around the fasting, right? So I've done a few dry fasts, but I'm not as hardcore as you. And we talk about that quite often. But I've done like several long water fasts. I've done like a 3-day water fast when me and my sister went hiking Trolltunga in Norway. So that was really cool.
That's cool.
And like the benefit of that is that I felt super high all the time. Right? So I was like really like, whoa, this is awesome. And seeing that it's like, it doesn't require any glucose, right? You can use your fat tank, right? So like that works really well. So done different types of fasting, OMAD, whatever, alternate day eating, all this type of stuff. And my conclusions are that it's based on a lot of different factors, right? So your stress levels, which means like your thyroid levels, and there's a lot more physiology behind it. So again, like what the appropriate amount of fasting is dependent on the individual. And the way there is to experiment with different fasting modalities. And like now I'm at a place where I fast way less because I'm also leaner and have more muscle. And I know that for like my body, like my hormones, like especially my thyroid hormones, because I can kind of like, I can feel that. Like I get, I've had that now more recently, and that's also because of the stress and stuff like that, right? Again, thyroid hormones that I get really cold really fast. And for the people that don't know, right, I've been swimming in the fjords for like 10 minutes in 4 degrees Celsius water. So like getting cold to me is a weird experience then, right? It's like, oh, this is not what it's supposed to be, but it just means that the thyroid got downregulated, right? That the metabolism isn't doing what it's supposed to do. And again, that's dependent on the individual, and especially how much stress you have, like how much body fat you have, how much muscle mass, right? Because it eats a lot of energy. No,
so let's get into that for a little bit. I have some more questions, but it's a funny place to start, but because you mentioned the thyroid and stuff. for what person really shouldn't fast, except for the obvious one, like someone who's like super ripped and barely has any body fat. That makes sense, of course.
Yeah.
But there is actually a time where even someone could be even overweight, right? And it's not the best time to be fasting.
Yeah, so if somebody that's overweight, right, and they shouldn't fast is if they already have a really, really shitty thyroid. So if you're very hypothyroidic, then it's better to just kind of, well, like not fast as much. You can fast some, but not
But maybe more intermittent fasting.
more intermittent fasting. So what that means is just no long fast. So, and again, like I can't put up a time frame.
No, of course.
But the thing is that like fasting in that state, right, physiologically with the hormones from the thyroid, it would add extra stress. So it would dysregulate the thyroid even more. So that's definitely something that I, like, at that point wouldn't recommend to a long degree. You should have a time restricted eating, right, where it's following the circadian rhythm. But again, like then if you have like an 8 to 10 hour window, you're probably good, or you are good, right? It doesn't get that like severe. The other one is women in general. Because that really like depends, especially if you're off the pill, because there's a difference. Because there's periods, or like there's phases in their period where fasting will disrupt their thyroid as well. And there's phases in their period where it's actually like intuitive for them to eat less. So they can intuitively fast. But again, a lot of the research done on fasting is also done on guys. And we're much better with these like, what is like hormesis, right? So environmental hormesis, just meaning that we can go without these like stimuli, right? Because we've been out hunting and whatever.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think it's because the women were still at the camp, you know? And they probably had food by the camp, right?
Yeah, but it's even more on a fundamental biological level is that their reproductive system asks way more energy, right? And it needs to constantly be kept fueled, whereas for us it's not the problem. Like we don't have a menstrual bleed, right? So we're not losing all this energy and nutrients, resources, really, right? Effectively, in one word, right? Because they lose a lot of like iron, they lose a lot of other minerals, right? And like if you would want to be fertile, what you need is a high abundance of resources, right? Because you're gonna build a baby out of that.
So to be clear, this is not like Sim saying fear-mongering that women shouldn't fast at all. It's just that women might have to be more careful.
Definitely more, like, let's just say cautious or strategic. It's just like, okay, like follow your intuition in that, and like if you're off the pill, definitely track where you are in your cycle and make it correspond to that. And then the benefits will be amplified and the negatives or like the disadvantages will be evened out or won't be any at all.
Yeah, and it's a shame these days with, trust your intuition. I want to say that too, but frankly, too many people's bodies are just too screwed up. So if they go by their intuition, it's not going to go well at all. They're just gonna be wanting to eat junk food and not really hit the gym, and so
true.
It's at a certain point. Interesting one that because of course the signals we get from our body in the ideal state, they tell us exactly what we need to know. But not everyone is quite as lucky. So one kind of random question. This is one thing I do with Sim. The thing with Sim is that I do the whole uncommon sense thing, and not to say that Sim is very smart and uses logic and all that, but I often just see things, how they work, and I just try to explain look, if you do this kind of thing, this is what it gonna work out with, here's a metaphor for that, or something like that. But so I often ask Sim about these things because he knows the underlying mechanisms a lot more. And so one kind of it's for me personally, this is interesting. I had thought about it before, but it was especially after my 1 week fast that, so let's put it like this. The body can get more and less sensitive to different stimuli and, caffeine, substances, whatever. And you can, again, you can fast from something and you become more sensitive again. And so one thing I've been thinking about is, can you, by fasting, would it make sense that you get more sensitive to growth stimulus after the fast? So because and I'm getting to it that when I did a 1 week fast, I lost weight obviously, but then when after like a week or so of refeeding and training, or 1 or 2 weeks, I felt like I look like bigger, like not just that I'm leaner, I actually look bigger, and I started thinking, is this the thing? And I'm like, maybe I'm just, seeing that, I'm not sure. But then a lot of people started saying this to me, and then so I mean, like, could it make sense that you could, with a long fast, like, make yourself a bit more sensitive to the input from training and eating protein again?
Yeah. So fundamentally, when you're fasting, right, that's why it's used quite often for diabetics, because it lowers so it makes you more insulin sensitive, right? The resistance starts going away. So fundamentally, when we think about anabolic hormones, insulin is one of them as well, right? It's just like gets fucked up with people in diabetes, right? And this is one of these things, exactly, like that's one factor, right? We're already like insulin both on, which gets produced even with protein in your system. It will make you more sensitive. So your cells, the insulin receptors, and how insulin gets shuttled, so the insulin signaling all gets amplified. Especially when you do like 7 days, which is fucking crazy. Then you're basically like, you scrub everything clean and you amplify everything, right? Because the signal has been, there is nothing. But it's kind of like, it's like, think of it like this. It's, for a lot of people, the drain is kind of clogged. Yeah, stuff goes through, but it doesn't go through smoothly. So you lose a lot of stuff. And the signaling as well gets kind of fucked up, right? I don't have another analogy or metaphor for this. So like, in terms of signaling, I can't connect that. But in terms of using resources, it's kind of that. In the first instance, what happens is like your drain is completely unclogged, right? Which means like everything resource-wise can now travel these pathways. And the cells are so receptive, literally, that they just open up and grab everything they can. And then you have that super compensation, right? And where that's like, now you're super sensitive to all these things. And the body experiences that abundance, and it can all goes through, well, there's a hierarchy, like, what's kind of like energy or fuel energy, right? That's the same. Repair, growth, right? And then the first thing is like, you'll notice like, oh, my energy, like all of a sudden this increase, right? Then all the repair is taking place because there wasn't that much damage. Now the resources come to repair, and then boom, the rest is all growth, right? And that's the signaling on multiple levels, because all your hormones, like insulin, like IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1, probably your human growth hormone as well, testosterone and stuff like that, will all become more sensitive and receptive to these resources.
So it seems like I'm not completely out there with that.
No. I think you're very spot on, actually.
Then, of course, like, this is not to say, like, do a fast and you're basically on steroids, but, you tune things up just...
Yeah, definitely. Like, there's the... Yeah, like just like your experience, right? And that's gonna, like, the time frame will probably depend, and it depends on your physiological state, right? Somebody that's obviously insulin resistant is gonna have to go a ways before that would be changed, but it's already in the short term by fasting improves that, right? If you're looking for higher anabolic effects, you already need to be in a better physiological state.
No, I love this because, fasting, not eating. Like, I mean, people are into building muscle, like you and I, but lots of people, they are afraid of fasting because you think they're going to lose muscle and all that. First of all, I had videos about that. It doesn't really happen, but also, if you can think bigger picture, that obviously you're not building muscle on a fast. If you're not eating for 5 days and on the third day you train, you're not going to build muscle from that one workout. But if you think bigger picture, you set yourself up for maybe being able to gain even more muscle than you would have otherwise. So, it's cool. It's really cool, counterintuitive to make part of like a bodybuilding routine to not eat.
Yeah, man. But that's what also puts you in a completely different category, right, than most people out there.
Yeah. So there was one thing when I was on your podcast last summer that I thought was so interesting when you explained it to me. This is one of those things that I've just picked up on how it works with fasting and the food addiction that for me, I was just kind of amazed by fasting when I got into it, and I did all these experiments, and I was always refeeding on the good whole foods, you know, and I just kind of noticed that because at that point before, it was not like I had a huge food addiction issue or anything, but I could definitely be tempted by many things, and so I just kind of noticed how like general hunger is not as difficult to deal with at all. And these other things now, I don't care about them because I enjoy the foods I eat so much. And and I have kind of my way of explaining how that works, but I think you explained it so well. And so I'd love to just hear that again.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of these like craving signaling, it has different moving parts, but I would say like the main two ones is the reward centers, both in the brain and the gut, and bacterial signaling, right? So I'm going to go with the latter one first. So bacterial signaling, or we could call it's also yeast, it's also fungi, it's also parasites actually, which are all supposed to be in the gut, by the way, right? It's just like the ratios and which ones that matters the most.
Sure.
But like any other living organism, it wants to stay alive. So when you take away the thing that it's feeding on, right, like a lot of these bacteria, or a lot of these like bacteria that can become problematic, feast on a lot of the, bad food, right? Like that's the only way to say it, like a lot of the junk food. And when you take that away, like if you take away their life source, right, like the source of food, then they're going to cause an issue. And bacterial signaling happens from the gut to the brain, right, through various things or various connections in the gut-brain axis, which is just a fancy word for saying that there's connections from the gut to the brain, right? And then it will literally signal a like starving signal. And that people have that like, oh, I need to eat this food, but you don't need to.
No.
It's the bacteria.
Again, being able to trust the intuition, right?
And then the other thing, and that's something that we delved into more, is that the reward centers in the gut and in the brain gets scrubbed and like reset. Right? So a lot of people have the dopamine feedback loop, right? Hedonic treadmill style, where it's like, oh, I eat this, like ice cream is a good example, right? It's the perfect combination of everything. It has like some salt, it has fat, and it has sugar, right? What's not to love? So when you eat that, it's like both reward centers in the gut and in the brain just kind of light up. But when you take that, not just when you take that away, but when you fast, right? The first thing that happens is that you scrub these receptors clean. And the second thing that happens is that the baseline, right? So what it activates, right? It drops. So it makes you more. We could also say it makes you more sensitive to these types of foods, which it does. But the dependency on them goes away because your dopamine comes back to baseline. It's like now just eating some food creates the same type of response. Instead of that, you need, you know, the newest Ben and Jerry flavor that has 25 fucking different flavors, right? It's this adaptation thing that dopamine does and that the physiology does, right?
And so this is what I want people to understand, because a lot of people feel like they're missing out on something now. And you're going to feel that way right now, but just play with the thought that you never, this was never available to you. Then you can't miss out on something. And if you don't just kind of have to be stoic and no, I'm feeling this way. But if you can come to a point where you're going to feel the things you're missing out on, the Ben and Jerry's, now, like just the meat and potatoes or whatever you're now going to eat, it has the same effect. Like the foods we've been eating, we've been enjoying the shit out of it. It's just regular food.
It's just normal whole food.
Some meat, some fruit, some kefir, butter.
That's literally all it is, right?
Yeah.
And the really fucked up thing, what people don't know, and this is not known generally, is that the palate of the tongue changes because of these types of foods. But it also changes when you fast. So it resets these types of, like, the tongue, the taste receptors as well. And the longer you eat that way, and that's why we can say, like, just a bowl of like kefir and maybe some fruit and honey, that's like, it's even better than a lot of these hyper palatable foods. Because our tongue receptors and palate has just changed. Like even a good steak is amazing, right? I mean, it just tastes so good. But because, you know, these physiological changes have occurred, come back to baseline that you can actually taste the taste of these things, rather than like your mind gets tricked with these hyper palatable foods, and then all these adaptations happen. So it's not just your gut, it's not just your brain, it's your tongue too, right? Which you can literally reset and reshape according to the foods that you will enjoy that you aren't necessarily now, right?
Super interesting. And what I want people to understand too is, right, if you're right now eating the junk food every day, even doing one fast, sure, if you refeed on the whole foods that day, you're probably going to enjoy it a lot, even if it's very like plain like that. But it doesn't like quite go away just with a one fast.
No.
But you can always do these gradual things. Like I even did that kind of even before I started fasting. Like I tried to, what way can I use to make it at least better for now? It's still not the optimal thing. So for instance, I was relying on some of these things like, keto, sweetened things like high fat, low carb chocolate balls with some sweeteners. I had some protein bars here and there and stuff. And it's the same thing kind of with food, that maybe first I wanted more, even not eating junk food, but maybe I want some kind of sauce or something on it, which I will have I have some barbecue sauce, a high quality one. I have it every now and then. But the point is, it can be a gradual process too. And I always think that sometimes it can be overwhelming to someone. It seems so far away, that, but I feel like I need all this shit. And I'm going to eat, you tell me I eat potatoes and a steak with nothing else. And it's like, but you don't have to start out there. That's fine. We can recognize that, this would be the kind of ideal, but it's okay. If you can make it work in between stages.
For sure.
And you'll get there eventually.
Most definitely.
Let's see. The last thing, it's semi-related, I mean, with the fasting, of course, but I talked too about fasting and depression. And it's going to be quite a nice segue when we talk about the states, actually. But I've noticed this was also the unexpected effect from fasting for me. But basically, the way I describe it, that especially in the modern world, where we're so overwhelmed with social media and just our environment, overstimulated in many ways. So we have many abstract worries and fears and problems we think about. And when you remove something so fundamental as food, that you will, even if we're talking about fasting, you don't need to eat as often as you might think, and it's okay to not eat for days, you have to eat at some point. So when you remove something so fundamental, it just really changes your perspective. Like the example that I think is easy with people's little social anxieties, for instance, like, I see that person I kind of know on the street. Should I say hi? Should I pretend to look at my phone kind of thing? It's not a big thing, and it's not something I worry about these days, even when not fasting. But just as an example, when you haven't eaten for a few days, maybe you're like, should I say hey or not? But you're not like worried about it. Like if this person makes eye contact, you're like, hey, for instance. So it's just these more abstract problems just kind of go away when you so I just kind of want to get your take on this thing.
It's actually quite simple. So there's a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can Google it. So Maslow, Maslow. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs basically postulates or says that, or theorizes, but it's not a theory anymore, that there's a pyramid of needs, right? And the base is physiology. It's water, so hydration, food. Well, shelter is technically in there, but I mean, people live on the street, so you don't necessarily need shelter, but water and food, right? So, and in the organism as well, one of the most important things in there is obviously water and food, right? So there's three things you can't live without: breathing, eating, and drinking. It's four, and sleep. Take any of those away, and the system will automatically shift its hierarchy of importance. Always. It doesn't matter what you take away out of these four, right? So, but it will literally turn to like now that that deficit is there, the only thing that matters is making up this deficit. And the brain is really interesting like that it also shifts. Yeah, like it's not just like, oh, my focus has shifted. It's like that need trumps over everything else like everything else just fades away. Yeah. But also like the way the brain fires changes. And that's, like I don't have any, like I guess you could look at like some brain scans of people that do this type of stuff, or even brain scans on fear and stuff like that, as it changes the perception towards the outside world. This does as well. And then it just kind of makes stuff like that fade. What's important to say with that, like if you would, like fast from food, basically. Don't fast from your sleep, guys. Yeah. And, keep reading. I've said that one before, right? Then it's not like it solves all your problems.
No.
And that's not the point. It's just that you will feel removed from your problem.
Yeah, like the way I actually kind of thought of it right now is that I think the person with it's just really a lot of head stuff, like there's not really anything much wrong in their life. I think actually the fasting could kind of cure it on its own like that. But say that sometimes if you have like actual problems in your life, like tough relationships or some kind of job situation, whatever it might be, of course that won't go away just because you fast. But because we're going to talk about the states, when you are in a low state like that and extremely stuck in your perspective and you see no way out, the fast can kind of give you relief from that. So you get some distance, it's still there, but you might during this time be able to see more clearly and see like the way out more. And then when you break the fast and go back, this is what I experienced. So let's do the segue into this right now, actually. So me and Sim, without going into specifics, have been kind of carrying each other through some tough life situations, and we've been in a low state. And what I experienced throughout this was because I started doing my cut, and when I do the bi-weekly fast, and every time this was what kind of happened, because I had some real problems, but I felt a distance from them during the fast, and then when I break the fast, like it sort of comes back, but I've elevated my state just a little bit, because I now see the way out a bit more clearly. So absolutely, it's not like, all your problems will just go away when you fast, but it could definitely be a very helpful tool to get there, but you have to actually take steps to change the actual problem too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Segue to the States. Like the States, it's a very interesting conversation, but I think it's a little difficult to know where to start. So I'm sure that when we get the discussion going, we'll just be able to, when we get the ball rolling. But let's put it like this, Sim. When we talk about states, what do we mean?
Yeah, so the state, as we will try to define it to a certain degree, is a physiological state, or then I'm already tying a lot of the physiology in it, but it's actually a state of being. So a lower state, we tend to use the word depression that often, but depression falls on a spectrum. Like I was in a pretty low state, but I wasn't depressed in any way. It's just like I didn't...
You're kind of same,
right? Like it didn't, like nothing... How do I feel? Like things felt good, like training felt good, but I didn't feel good about, the circumstances that I was in and, at other stages in my life about myself. And so that's a low state. Like we can use a identifier more as like a low emotional state, right? Without it being, like PTSD, expression, trauma, all of this type of stuff. Just a low state. Now, physiologically, I'll make the tie-in, right? What that means for us and the way we conceive of it is that it's a low dopamine state. And for both of us, like things were fine physiologically, meaning that our sleep was pretty good. I mean, my sleep was pretty shit in all.
I mean, mine was great in a way, but
right. So,
but I also slept much more than I usually do, and that's also an indicator that the state is not great.
So sleep is a really big indicator of this, and even with my sleep not being as good as it could have been, and definitely had some bad days.
Yeah.
It was still like, it's not like we were doing the stuff to make your sleep good, right? We were doing the stuff to make our nutrition good. We were doing the stuff to make our training good.
We're training, we're getting the sunlight.
Training good, sunlight, all of it, right? So we have all the physiological bases covered. So that's where this, like, the physiology, like, because if that's not good, guys, right? Dopamine synthesis or production and transport, or like, you know, whatever, like binding, really, that gets blocked, right? Inflammation blocks the receptivity of dopamine. But it wasn't really the case for us. So we need to discount, like, that's why the low dopamine happened. But low dopamine happened anyway because, you know, psychology, emotion drives physiology and vice versa, right? So this bi-directional thing constantly happens. So we were in that state, right? Still with all of these good things, but that our dopamine was just so low. And like, okay, how do we know that this low state is dopamine dependent? Not only, but predominantly, let's say. Because there was just no drive.
Yes.
There was no excitement. I still enjoyed training to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is prefrontal, right? Like, it's stoic stuff, basically. It was like, this is the shit we need to do. And we know this is right for us, so we do that. But it's not like you're inspired, you're not excited, you don't have drive, you're not motivated. None of these things. You just, like, dopamine, right, not only as a reward, but as a driver towards action and an enforcement of behaviors is really important. So our enforcement of behavior was superseded by our ability to be disciplined.
Yeah, basically.
Right? And that's kind of like what drove that. But the low dopamine was really, literally just like, okay, like, you don't feel fucking excited for anything.
No, and you don't feel excited about the things you really should. Like, and so it's like, it's not that, you know, you're very aware, it's not that I lost interest in this, whatever it is. It's just that it's that excitement is just not accessible to me right now.
Yeah.
And the whole thing with keeping the training and nutrition, everything on point still, to me, it's just like, you know, I'm really feeling shitty right now. I know how much worse it could be if I didn't. Because that's what we're talking about. We're not, like, you can say that it's like I call my video, like, Depression 2022, because, you know, it's still kind of that what it's about. But that's how we can say that we're not necessarily depressed still. It's just, we're not the opposite, definitely not.
No. Because, like, it's hard to be happy about the circumstances we found ourselves in and the extension. So, because it was, again, it's generally multidimensional, so there was a lot of other factors that tied into that. But as you pointed out, right, it was on a spiritual level. Right? It was, and for me, it was on a social level and also professional. But, like, that type of stuff, it's easier to manage if these other things were okay.
Exactly.
And that's kind of like this whole, you know, that we talked about quite often. So when you are in a depressed state, stereotypically, and you start moving, eating, sunlight, all this other jazz, there's a high likelihood that will take you out of it. Very high, right? Again, but if it's spiritual, social, then this is more abstract, right? So it's not something that you can just like, oh, I know exactly what I need to do.
And I was train harder.
Yeah, exactly. Let's eat better. And like, no, like, these things were on point anyway, right? But if they weren't, it would make everything way, way worse. So we knew that, and like, for my situation as well, I was, not stuck in Oslo, but I was in Oslo in a situation that I didn't want to be in, and where the situation, like, I couldn't resolve that. Like, I had to be there. So you're just kind of like, it's mitigating. It's just doing, like, damage control, right? So there wasn't like, oh, I'm just gonna fucking snap my fingers and, like, now I can address this social situation.
No, exactly.
Right? Or, like, I'm not gonna snap my fingers and all of a sudden my coaching is fully booked, right? It just doesn't work that way. But, right, as we kind of, like, leaned into that already, like, when you're in a high state, navigating these types of things is, if not much easier, it just matters way less.
Right? Exactly. And so, in that kind of, like you say, when there's on the spiritual level and you're there, you have to be there. The dopamine, like you told me, is, it's dictated a lot by your feeling that you're on the right path. And it's very difficult, even though because you are technically on the right path then. Then you have to be there. So but it's just that there's a bunch of other stuff you'd rather do. Yes. You can't do that. So it's hard to have the experience of yeah, but I'm doing the right thing. I am on the right path. Oh, yeah. Like that.
Like we can relate that to, like, imagine, because this is where a lot of the analogy kind of makes sense, right? So in terms of both reinforcement of being on the right path, imagine that you went hunting and you find tracks. That's like, oh, I'm on the right path. Yeah. Obviously, like, he's already
now you get excited.
Exactly. But imagine that you go out hunting and you never see any tracks. But you have to trust that you're still going in the right direction. Yeah. And that's a lot of that, like, you don't get any reinforcement, but what's the other alternative? Like, do you stop? Yeah. Do you go back? Like, what are you going to do?
Exactly.
You need to keep moving forwards in order to find out if you are on the right path. That reinforcement will come. But it's just extremely delayed, right?
And that's kind of what Stoicism is, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Just even when you're not riding that high state, and it's just clear to you, you have to just know how things really are.
Yeah, and like I would also connect that back to the stuff that I said in the beginning about about us, right? Where it's just like doing all these things, right? Is Stoic in that you prefrontally, like, you can logically and reasonably, or by using reason, know that, I'm doing the right things. Yeah. And this is what matters, because then you will have to emotionally detach, as we had to do. I mean, you still feel the emotions, but it detach from, like, this is the situation. Or you detach from the emotions around the situation. Whilst I know this, like, kind of sounds paradoxical, but you can still feel like shit and function.
Yeah, exactly.
And that, especially in this type of low dopamine.
Yeah, but to take the good example, I know it's the same for you. Like, when you, at least me, I get in that state. As an extreme extrovert that I actually am, that's how you know that I'm in a low state is that goes away, and I kind of become the opposite. I feel very withdrawn. I just kind of don't feel like being with anyone almost. And still I can't live my life like that, right? Of course, and it makes sense, I shouldn't be as much around people because it will take energy from me when I feel that way. But I have some shit I need to get done. And then, for instance, with my client calls, I never even considered not doing that, I will always be on time and do that with them. Yes. Maybe the kind of excitement I have right now and high energy, maybe I won't have quite that, but I can still be there and talk through the process and how's it going with this? Have you thought about that? Kind of thing. So that's the thing with feeling like shit but functioning still. I'm sitting there. I'm not enjoying myself right now. It's nothing personal with my client. In fact, it's personal in the sense I want to talk to them still, but I can do it still.
Yeah, so. And I think that's where generally a lot of the perceptions and perpetuations of Stoicism is completely incorrect. Because it's not about being apathic. No. It's not about not feeling them. It's just about not having these emotions dictate your behavior in a destructive sense or in a self-sabotaging sense. Because we both were feeling really bad, and there were certain things that, like, I would want to do, right? But it was just
I want to do that.
Yeah, that as well. But, like, in terms of, like, being specific, right? Okay. Like with the breakup, for instance, like there were times where, like, a behavior, like wanting to reach out or, like, say something negative, but I knew, like, okay, that's like it's if I follow that feeling, the line of consequences are going to be negative. It's destructive towards her and towards me. Yeah. Right? Whereas, like, being able to detach from that, like, I can feel those very strong emotions, but behaviorally, nothing changes. Like, I don't follow through with a behavior that is aligned with that emotion, right? Instead, behavior is aligned with that. Like, knowing that this is the better thing to do.
Yeah, and for someone else, this might be, for instance, I feel like shit. It would be really nice to just have some ice cream and comfort myself, kind of. But then if you go by that emotion, then the ice cream is not good for you. Yeah, it gives you that little dopamine hit in the moment. Yeah. Just as, what you felt like doing there, it will feel good in the moment. But then the truth behind this. And so you can still choose to go against that like that.
Yes. 100%. And that's also, like, it requires, or I would say, right, like a base of self-discipline. Right? Yeah. If you've already built that, then a less, like a low dopamine state or a low state in general has less sway, right? If you're in the beginning, it's self-discipline is like a skill. It's like a muscle, like you build that. So then it just kind of like comes, right? Down the line.
Yeah.
And that's why like we just didn't really have like issues with staying self-disciplined.
Exactly. I'll admit what my thing in the low state is, because one of the ways I always, my previous self, to gain, feel validated and feel like I'm worth something and find some kind of meaning, I tried to get laid with girls, basically. And if you've been following me for some time now, I'm coming up on 3 years in a celibacy now. Wow. Gonna celebrate that with another video. But yeah, in the low state, because in the low state, it doesn't matter that I know these things about myself, that I've changed my life in an amazing way. I've made really great gains, but both here and here and here. But I know all these things, but I can't experience, I don't feel good about myself. And so then that old like urge to just hook up with a girl to feel good about myself comes up. But I'm like never close to doing it,
Yeah, exactly, right? That's a good illustration, right, of where you can feel something but not behaving that way.
Yeah. So, like, I wanna, because I'm sure this is making sense to some people, but I'm sure it's kind of abstract still, because it is, we've talked about that when you and I, when we talk, we know very well what we mean, but so, what's the difference, you would say? Like, you can say for you personally or in general, when you're in a low state and in a high state?
Yeah, so like, you kind of pointed at the right thing. So I would say it's a combination of things, but one of the things that stands central is energy. When you're in a low state, there's just energy for certain things. Yeah. And then these things like the training, like the keeping nutrition on point, keeping sleep
job
on
stuff.
point, of course, work stuff, right? That all gets, pushed up in the hierarchy. It's always high in the hierarchy, but then it's like everything else, like I'm not going to spend energy on that. So all the energy that I do have available will go to these things. Yeah. So that's one. And it's not even just about like feeling good necessarily, although it ties into that. It's about being very clear, right? I think for me, especially personally in the high state, I see a lot. And like, okay, the way I'll explain this to this, and I hope that's going to make some sense, is that when you're in a low state, these neuromodulators, they change the function of how the brain works. Yeah. So your prefrontal cortex, this like, the frontal lobe, so the newest addition to our brain, it has blood vessels, right? It has the neurological pathways. What happens is that when there's a low state and there's lots of stress, and also when there's lots of inflammation, by the way, then these blood vessels squeeze shut. Yeah. Right? So you effectively, energy and resources aren't making it to these areas. But other parts of the brain get hyperstimulated, other parts of the brain get understimulated. Which means that if we use that example, right? So cognitively, you don't have that much access to things, but that also means that you don't have access to other things. Yeah. So that's why we always say like everything is state dependent. So information is state dependent, wisdom is state dependent, but everything is state dependent. Yeah. Yes. Because it's stored in different locations in the brain, and it needs like an access key or an access code, which is a certain neurotransmitter, which is a certain pathway opening, right? And like different parts of the brains, like, the hippocampus, blah, 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 right? There's so much, we'll not go into the details.
A little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, but like what essentially happens in a high state is that, as you actually pointed out to it before as well in the conversation, you get access to it. You become more of who you are because you have more access to the things that make you. Exactly. Right? And this is because the brain architecture working in such a way, and, don't have a identity crisis because of this, but a lot of that is based in the front. Because the more further back you go in the brain, right, it's the limbic cortex, is emotional. This is what animals also have, right, which makes them instinctive. And even further back, it's what they call the reptilian brain. It's the brainstem, right? It's breathing. A lot of the stress responses are there. So think about it like this: if the brain, like, and I'm using my hands as like, imagine that it's like a sponge
holding a
between.
brain.
Holding a brain. So if think about the brain as a sponge, but yeah, it can get squeezed inwards, but it's more like it gets squeezed backwards, right? So like, what is these? The slinkies, for instance, right? The slinky is like these like round things that like bounce. Like Americans will know.
I think
like, it goes down the stairs. That thing. Right, when you press it together, think that your one hand is pressing it to the backhand. And this is the way brain architecture works, right? Because where is your brain? On top of your neck, right? So it goes through the brainstem, which is in the bottom, then the limbic cortex, and then to the front, right? So all the energy resources go into, the other parts first, because that's, again, the way brain architecture works. But that's why I'm saying, like, you become more instinctual, right? When everything is in the back, when everything is in the bottom. So in the brainstem and in the limbic cortex, right? And that's why you don't have access to higher order reasoning, logic, predictive modeling, right? Thinking, cause and effect. And that's why a lot of times you get tunnel vision when you're stressed. It's that you lose access to information. You literally, in your eyes, there's a narrowing, right? In restriction of the blood vessels, thus literally effectively giving you tunnel vision, but psychologically as well.
It's so interesting because this, I've been meaning to ask you even outside this. I noticed that my vision got worse during this time.
It's because of that, basically. And the visual cortex and the eyes are obviously connected, right? So when there's a restriction in the prefrontal cortex, it's not just there. Other parts are being restricted as well. So it's possible that there's also some restriction happening in the visual cortex because stress affects the whole brain, right? And like it even like degrades neurons. So think about a neuron like a plant. Right? And like, think about a dying plant. It doesn't look like a blooming plant. And this is the same degradation that happens through a neuron in your brain. Right? So stress affects you on these different levels. So think about it like the more of this the restriction fades, right? The more open my brain comes, like the plant, like the flower, right? The more you see the flower. Right? The more the brain opens up, the more that your perception of the outside world changes. Right? The opposite of tunnel vision, I guess, is like, wide vision or something, right? Hence seeing more. And we could say like, physically, but psychologically, emotionally as well. Right? And this again has to do with like brain architecture because there's so many different parts of your brains that do different things and store different things. And that's how you get access to stuff. And it changes the stress axis in the brain as well, right? It rewires that. And that's why you are behaving differently, right? In a high state. And why, again, we spoke about like this distance, right? Distance from your problems, distance from stimuli, distance from everything.
And all these things you're telling me right now were so helpful in that low state. Because I of course notice on some, like again, like intuitively through the experiences I've been through. But for instance, I told you guys before in other videos that, like for instance, making videos in a high state for me, it's like, of course it will take energy still. In the end, if I go and shoot a video, I feel a little like I had a shit or something. I don't know. But while I do it, it's, I love it, now the metaphor there is like, I guess it's still true. But, But so the point is, most of the time in a high state, I just love doing my videos. I go out, and also the video ideas. I don't have to think about video. I will sometimes someone would hit me and I will write it down for later. But I just like I have time to record some videos and I don't have one written down. I'm like, let's do about this. I just find something. In the low state, I'm like, I don't feel like doing videos, and okay, but I have to. But what should I even talk about? And that can, when you don't understand the nature of the state and that everything is state dependent, you can feel like I'm losing it. Like, shit, why am I like this? And it becomes this very bad loop where you feel like shit and you beat yourself up over it, so you feel even worse. But when you can have that, this is something we've talked about. The C game, we call it upping the C game. So in the high states, because it's not just too high or low. There's of course degrees to this.
The spectrum,
But in a A game, you don't. Everything is just working. Everything is working the way you want it to, or better almost. And yeah. And then in the low state, it just doesn't. But if you can have this awareness that this is just what life looks like. You can't, because when we're talking about the states, just because we know so much about this and understand it well, it doesn't mean that, and therefore we'll always be in the high state.
No, exactly.
But so the more you can understand this and get better self-awareness, you will be better at navigating this lower state. So, for instance, for me, because with the videos, I just kind of understand that, okay, my kind of inspired rants and where I'm kind of funny and stuff, that kind of just won't happen in the low state. So, okay, let's focus on the more technical side of things. Okay, if you don't have fast, do it like this, and that's kind of what I can do. And for instance, with work, in the high state is when I might take on more new clients or see some other opportunity like that. But in the low state, it's okay, the clients, the work I have now, that's almost too much for me. And then because I can feel bad about, I should be able to do more. But if I know it's the nature of the state, it's that this is all I have access to right now.
Exactly.
I can, feel better about it in that sense. I can be, I'm not going to be happy about, I'm so glad I'm going to do less, but I can accept it and not beat myself up over it. And that's a big, step towards the higher state again. Because that's the thing, when you just beat yourself up, or you just kind of, get in a lower and lower state like that.
So the thing that we're kind of putting forth here, right, is that it's not all about the A game.
No,
trust me, we like to be there, right? So it's a natural process of getting there, and not necessarily staying there as long as possible, but mitigating the rest as much as possible, so you wouldn't slip into a C, like a low state C game. But knowing that, because life works this way, right? It's highs and lows. It just means that the next low, right, will be easier to navigate.
Yes.
And that the next low is higher than the previous low. And that's what we call raising your C game. Because in my C game, because I had a really bad burnout with an arrhythmia, which means that my heart was skipping beats, and I had tachycardia, which means that my heart went from resting heart rate to 100 beats per minute, cyclically for a few hours on end, which is it's not fun, guys. So, but in that state, even I had to do certain things like work, right? And then there was kind of this energy, it would take a lot out of me, but I still managed, right? So in the C game, and don't worry, not everyone's C game is gonna look like this. It's very unlikely. The point is just that when you get to that state, that you can do these types of things, because as you grow as a person, right? And as you keep doing these things, moving your A game eventually moves up your C game as well, right? And as you keep improving, as you keep understanding, right? Theo talked about acceptance. When you come to a next low, that's still a higher low than before, then you can just kind of go into that and it's the nature of the state.
Exactly.
I'm not flawed. There's nothing wrong with me. It's just I don't have access to these things, right? That doesn't mean I'm not gonna do anything. It doesn't mean that I'm not gonna try. It just means I am gonna navigate this by accepting that this period is a phase. It's a period, and you'll still feel shit and you won't be happy about it, but your C game at least will be functional.
And this also comes back to what I've talked about a lot lately, with being process-oriented instead of results-oriented. Because in the low state, you want nothing more than to be in a high state again.
Yes.
So when I know I talked about this in my depression video, that when I do try to do the Stoic stuff, but I feel like I'm not getting anywhere in my life. I'm not happy about myself. I feel all this. So I mechanically, because I know this about the states, this is how you feel, but what are things real? I remind myself of all the ways I am blessed in my life, and all the things that I am factually just a lot better at than most people, and then still I don't feel better. And this was my problem, that I think I've leveled up my C game until my next low state, when life hits me in the face again, that I think I'll be able to arrive at this conclusion faster. That's right, that's the nature of the state. Just because I can know how this I feel like it should I give it a result. I want to feel better about it. But no, this is part of the process. I have to just go through this, understand, accept that this is part of it. And that's kind of fun. It's an attract, don't chase thing. That's when I, temporarily, not get into the high state like that, but a little slightly higher state. Oh, that's right. Oh, it's okay that I do a little less now. It's okay that I can't be at my best right now. That kind of thing.
And energy is limited, right? So that means like if you can't pour from an empty cup. And I know 1,000 people have heard that, but they still keep trying. And when you accept that, I really just need to fill my cup now in constructive ways, then it just kind of puts you in a position to relax, right? It's like stressing about having stress, or it's stressing about stressing. It's worrying about worrying. Like it feeds the loop. Whereas when you can step out of that in that acceptance, and this is a process, by the way, guys. It's, again, nothing about this is snapping your fingers. But it makes that, it clears the table for that to occur. And I would say the other thing, if you're not there yet, which is okay, this, like going in your C game, going into a low state, it will be very illustrative of where your values lie. And I think that's why, like, we talk about self-discipline, but it's not like we're forcing ourselves to go train.
No, exactly.
Even though we're not excited or driven to go do that, it doesn't have any resistance. And that's not necessarily because we're hyper self-disciplined. It plays a part in that. Or we're not hyper self-disciplined. It's just normal self-discipline to my degree. But it's just that it's behavior that's aligned with values. And this is call it an exercise, right? If you get into that state, or if you are in that type of state now, just kind of look at your behaviors. Because it's going to tell you pretty clearly, like, what do you value? And you can see that, like, what are you doing? What are you spending the most attention, time, and energy on? And money even, right? And when you know these things, it's kind of like, oh, when I get into this state, and that's what, like, made the difference for me in this one as well, where I was like, oh, it's not that bad when I look at it. Like, I've been in way worse places, right? Like, I had major depression, anxiety, PTSD.
When I think about my panic attacks,
Exactly, right? So you can go back to these lows and think about that. Like, if this is the law, and trust me, guys, I really felt very shit. Very, very much so. But I could look at that. It's raining now.
We're lucky. Caught our son earlier.
If you look at that, like, oh, but all my behavior still aligned with my highest values, then you're not in a bad place even when you feel bad.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's understanding that thing. That's like the final key to navigating the low state.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Is there anything more you feel like you want to say about the states, or?
I just kind of like, on the thing that you were talking about, like with the videos and stuff, that it doesn't take anything, or it just kind of comes. And I kind of forgot to mention that it's like in a high state, the brain is not just better, but more primed to make connections. Because this, again, like not all of that, but most of that happens prefrontally. So there's some connections going on everywhere, of course, but like the way things connect is dependent on the states and the ease of which. And there's also like other physiological, so even your nutrition and your diet changes the way, like, neural pathways function, and like how well they transport electricity and stuff like that. We don't need to go into that, but the high state on its own does that through the abundance of these neuromodulators, right? Dopamine, acetylcholine, obviously serotonin is in there as well, and GABA, G-A-B-A.
Yeah, I think that the difficult thing in the low state is kind of finding the balance between, okay, it's okay that I'm in a lower state and have less output right now, and but what can I still do and should do? Because you're gonna have to use some amount of force to get certain things done,
For sure.
But that, again, it doesn't mean that you should, but I should be able to do everything I usually do and push like that. And that's kind of what I want to say. It's a difficult one, guys, because I want to be a bit hard on you sometimes. Like, no, you just got to do it, even when it doesn't feel good and all that. But sometimes it is too the right thing not to do it.
It's finding that balance. And everything is a balance like that. Which I know, it's poetic and it's a cliche and blah, 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 but it is that. Yeah, but you can't do nothing. That's not the point.
No.
You have to still do the things you have to do. It's just that, like, I like to look at it again. It's a spectrum. Like, where am I at on that spectrum? And just do what is possible in that spectrum, right? And yeah, like for you, as you said, like it's gonna be not necessarily less videos, but
quite literally too.
yeah, quite literally as well, right? So that's just part of that. Like it's. You will never function in your C game as in your A game, right? And like, get sick once and you will, experience that pretty clearly. Like, it's not like you're jumping up and down and then running out in the streets and lifting the heaviest weight you can. It's just like, like you just kind of like, what can I do in this state, right? And figuring that out.
Yeah.
And just go with the lowest threshold, right? So the thing that's the easiest to do, right? Of setting this type of like, maybe I can make one video for, the next 2 weeks or something, right?
Instead of like every other day, that's kind of what I try to go for in the high state. I try to do like a weekly one instead, for instance.
Yeah, there you go, right? So that's a good example of like scaling.
Yeah. And so I'll end on this note if you have nothing more to say about this. I want to do this video at some point too, but it's kind of like a poker tournament. It's like playing poker. So poker, for the one who doesn't play, it's obviously a luck factor with hitting the right cards, but it is a skill game too. But to win a tournament, even if you're the best player in the world, you could be out on one unlucky hand. You need to be lucky like that. So in poker, you talk about having upswings and downswings, which meaning that I could win. The majority of my winnings could come during a couple of days. The majority of my winnings through, let's say, 3 months could come in 2 days. And the rest, nothing's fucking happening. And then it's all about not getting like emotional and making bad decisions and just losing everything during the downswing. But it's the nature of the state, but the nature of the variance at that point. That, okay, I can't, the cards weren't with me. I have to know I did the right decisions. But that's just what it looks like now in this. And then when the upswing comes, that's when I ride high and I actually make this the bigger progress like that.
And there's an underlying point in there, which is just another way of phrasing it, is that balance is asymmetrical. And that's kind of like, even like, because then we would standardize or industrial balance means like I'm gonna do everything 50-50. I'm gonna work as much as I rest, right? That's balance, right? Quote unquote. But seeing that you cycle naturally through states, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go from A to C.
No,
it could be like you're cycling between A and B as well, right? Or for us, like the joke was like neutral and neutral plus. And neutral plus wasn't even a B; it was just like C plus, right? So it was like, okay, it's not bad.
It's better than completely apathetic or like,
right? So neutral plus was like, wow, I actually don't feel like shit today. It's a miracle.
Some things are actually a little bit enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then that's the thing, like, it's look at it like a series of sprints, where it's like, like I'm gonna, or like you said with the winnings, right? It's just asymmetrical. Like I'll do most of the stuff, like the work, like you said, like videos, etc., when I'm in a high state, and when I'm in a low state, I just do less. But at the end of the year, these things balance themselves out, right? Because it's like, I rested, right? This is the training analogy. Like, if I only sprint, like, then I'm only catabolic. But if I rest, right, then I have rest days, then I allow the muscle to grow, right? That hence the series of sprints. It's like, I need to rest before the next sprint. That's why it's asymmetrical. It's not like, like I'm gonna, like, no, like life dictates and we can just follow.
But it's like, finding the balance. It's quite, I can't come up with an example right now. But when you're literally balancing in some spot, in a situation physically, often, you have to adjust and be like that. Okay, when my left foot is further out here, this is the balance now. This thing is actually staying here. So that's the point about asymmetrical, that, there has to be both parts. But like I say, it's not 50-50. It's not, sometimes when you stand in the middle, one of the sides is going to be down like that.
Exactly.
So you have to, you won't know this exactly at the start. You have to kind of keep trying to find the balance, and eventually you're there.
Yeah, and that's also, again, like with fasting, like going up and down that spectrum. And then you'll be able to appreciate even, right, at the end of that process maybe, or in that process, but you're able to see what your balance is. Yeah.
100%. So, wow, we've been talking quite a bit. We're going to go on for a bit more, but I think there's some things I just can't get to right now. I guess we're going to have other conversations in the future too.
Yeah, we still have like, a good 40 minutes.
Yeah, but I have stuff. So I'm just thinking. Well, I kind of feel like just to get you to explain this on like... because I keep hammering down, like, I guess the things I focus on the most is like the things that you should be doing, training, good nutrition, good sleep, sunlight, and those are really the ones I hammer down the most. And fasting can kind of go into the nutrition to some extent. Then there's this like cold exposure and stuff, but I don't feel like it's a must. It's a good tool, but these first four that you need to do. So I kind of just want to ask you that very simple question, so you can give your take on it. Like, why is sleep so important?
Okay. So sleep, and it's funny that, that's the one thing people cut into the most. Yeah. Right? So if there's a time shortage, what do people do? Yeah, I'm just going to sleep less. Yeah. Right? Automatically. Not the approach that I would, promote.
No, definitely not.
So sleep is your only recovery state. Think about it like this. If my engine is running and it's running hot, is keeping it running gonna cool it down or regenerate? No, right? And obviously there's differences between a mechanic thing and an organism, or an organic thing, but organic matter has wear and tear, right? It wears down. But that sleep, again, is basically turning the engine off. It's giving a chance, like, the engine is never really off because you're alive, right? But the analogy stands like, let's say that the engine now can cool down and regenerate by doing so, right? An engine that overheats, at least in the past, right, it explodes to a certain degree, or you blow a gasket or a casket. I'm not even sure what the word is.
Me neither.
No, we'll let the Americans figure it out or tell us. Anyway, so sleep is the only real recovery state. This happens on every level. Deep sleep is the physiological repair. REM sleep is the psychological repair. And this is not just like, okay, now I'm repaired or, recovered. It's also like a human growth hormone is the highest when you sleep. So guys, if you're not sleeping, you're not making gains. And every other hormone gets refilled, if you like, right? Testosterone, that's why it's the highest in the morning, or not only why, but why it is high is because you use all of it up during the day, and at night you recover, right? So everything that you eat, not everything, but I'm just explaining it, right? What you eat gets converted, then it's like if you had a testosterone meter, it's full again when you wake up in the morning, or it should be, right? And that's why, like, sleep, it's the fundamental thing. Like, if you stopped eating and you stopped, drinking water, you would die, especially water, not relatively fast. Like, there's quite a longer margin than people understand. But after, I think it's 2 weeks of sleep deprivation, it becomes lethal. And like, this again depends on the bio-individual, but like, it's not like, it's just because it's after 2 weeks that it's lethal that it's a problem. Like, the degradation of the human psyche starts after day 2 already.
Lethal is lethal. There's some steps before that.
Exactly. And this is like, there's just no way around it, because the brain can't do all these other things, like clearing toxins, right? So the brain has its own lymphatic system. So clearing toxins and recovering all this stuff only happens when you sleep. And it's just kind of like, if you start, that's why, again, when I start with clients, it's generally sleep that I start with. Either sleep or stress, actually.
And I bet they love that.
Everyone fucking hates it. Because it's like, it's not like I tell them go to bed earlier. It's useless information. Everyone knows. I can just tell them, of course, why is sleep important? But it's I give them the steps and the hygiene, right? Quote unquote. So everything that's what makes sleep good.
Exactly. No, the funny thing with sleep, and I know I've been quite like that in a past life, kind of. But that a lot of people will go, when you tell them the importance of sleep, it's like, nah, but I do fine on my 5 hours or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, you might manage with your job or whatever it is, you feel like you get the shit done. Just try sleeping for 8 hours per night and you for a while, and you're going to be like, how did I ever do that?
Yes, so there's a physiological adaptation to the baseline, and I would say, like, surviving isn't thriving.
No, exactly. And there's, certain things, when I thought like that, I mean, sometimes because I had quite a shitty lifestyle, so sometimes even I knew that, okay, this is no good, But when I was up too late, I can lose my train of thought, but I think I thought that certain things were kind of normal, and I don't really see like these energy dips throughout the day. Like I remember, like even in like chemistry class in the gymnasium, high school, I used to always sleep during those lessons, and I mean that wouldn't even be possible for me right now. I think we've talked about that, me and the sleep. Wired up. I really had to try to calm myself down to sleep, but it's so obvious. And I remember one job I had always around lunch, I felt like I could fall asleep, kind of. And to have to deal with that shit every day. And so then when you start to sleep well and all that, it's like, no, there's no dips.
No,
I just feel great. I have high energy throughout the whole day. And in comparison, I managed. I could do that job. I could be in the school. How productive was I really? And so when you experience that contrast, it's like, this is the way to do it. Definitely.
And a lot of people, like, if you say, like, oh, I thrive on little sleep, there's 99% of that, I'm calling you, it's bullshit. You're lying. It's not. Like, unless, and why I say, like, it's even less than 99%, or it's even less than 1% of genetic outliers in the world that would be able to thrive on very little sleep. Because that polymorphism, so the change in genetics, is so uncommon. Most people, and we're in those categories, like, just need enough sleep, which is like between 7.5 to 9 hours.
So the next question I have also very fundamental, but ties into this too. Why is sunlight so important?
So that's why, like, fundamental is the right word, right? Because there is a reason why our planet is able to sustain life, right? It's called the Goldilocks zone. And if we didn't have a sun, if there's no light, there's no life. And I always found that fascinating, right? Because think about, like, all life on this planet developed under this orange sun, in the Goldilocks zone. Like, if you would take that away, which you can, like, they're not doing these experiments necessarily, but, like, they have done some of that for the research in space travel and also survivability in the nuclear fallout, that they put, like, people in underground bases for, like, research labs, basically, for some time. So there's definitely issues that start arising, and it's not just vitamin D. It's like the entire spectrum of light each part of the spectrum has a different effect on physiology. Right, so like vitamin D is obviously it's important because it modulates hormones and it connects to testosterone and dopamine. So
we like those ones, right?
We love those ones, right? No, going without that. That's also like why spring is a lot of guys get like here we go, right? It's 2 thumbs up because your libido goes up because of all the lights. But like fundamentally, light is important because like it literally nourishes life. So, and I use nourishing very deliberately because light is like nutrition. And some people that are light deprived essentially have a much lower creation of a lot of hormones. And like again with the sleep example, you can get by without a lot of light, but you're not get by. You're not thriving by any means.
No.
So in order to it's not even optimization as an intention, but to feel better, light plays an enormous role in that, right? Because it would be like saying, like, I'm going to stop eating fats. Right? That's what happens when you don't have natural sunlight. Like, you're literally missing a part of your diet. Right? Because sunlight is essential. And
it's kind of interesting to view it kind of like a spectrum of micronutrients or something.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And like, but yeah, like it goes, like there's so much to read, or like this, I've read so much about it, it's hard to select through the information.
No, I understand.
Fundamentally, as I said, like it's, alright, I can share this one, and that kind of goes like, life is energy, right? A lot of electron creation and transport comes from the sun and the earth, right? So like if you're grounding, there's electron transport as well. So electron transport is basically the most fundamental level of energy in the cell, right? A lot of people think we're just like a sack of meat with a chemical process, but that the chemical process is dependent on an electrical process, and that's these transference of electrons, hence electron transport chain. So if you don't have a lot of sunlight, that also means that the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell where energy is created, becomes dysfunctional. And it can't transport these electrons, create and transport these properly, right? So you're literally losing life force, or you have the inability to create the force of life, which is electric, via the sun.
Yeah.
So,
very good. This is something that's, it doesn't make me angry, really, because I don't really get angry anymore. But like all this talk about TRT or like testosterone boosters, like how can I boost my testosterone? And it's like, go out in the fucking sun and go to bed at a reasonable hour and sleep for a good amount of hours.
Start there.
Of course, the good nutrition would be important too, but but also even people think about it in the opposite or in the wrong order sometimes. Like I have low testosterone, so I can't build muscle. It's like, it's not that you can't build any muscle. It's going to be tougher. But what does building muscle do for your testosterone? It raises it. So and everyone is like, how can I fix this before I do these things? So it's like, get the fundamentals right. You're not going to need any booster or injections.
And like, this is also something that like became quite clear when I was reading, and observationally was already there. I just wanted the research to confirm it, because people have become so anal about everything being science-based or evidence-based. But if you look at like people in tribes, like these 70-year-old dudes could still keep up, and they still look jacked.
Yeah.
So was age really the problem in your testosterone, or is it your lifestyle? And it was actually a study, I don't think it's even a year ago, that like finally concluded conclusively that like, sarcopenia sarcopenia is loss of muscle mass. It's not an age thing, it's a lifestyle thing, right? And then we can just kind of tie that in, because the research is like, it drops when you're, getting older. Yeah, like it might drop marginally.
Yeah, but exactly.
And it's okay if it drops marginally, but the drop marginally naturally is okay. Like your body, like you might feel slight differences when you're advanced in age, right? That 70-year-old dude isn't probably slinging, the same weight that he did when he was 20.
No, exactly.
But caveat here as well, there are 70-year-old dudes that are still fucking strong and jacked.
Yeah, I saw this. Like a 91-year-old dude pulling like 4 plates on a deadlift for reps.
There you go, right? So it always harkens or like brings up this question, like, is it really age?
Yeah.
And it's like, not really.
No.
It's just because you have a shitty lifestyle and you did not do anything about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is why people need TRT. Why they're being put on TRT. It's because like, let's be honest, like if you would just fix your lifestyle and stuck with that, you wouldn't need it. And if you weren't, sorry to say, but like that stupid to fuck everything up in the first place, then you wouldn't get to that point at all.
No.
And I don't mean stupid in terms of like intelligence. It's just like your behavior is very counter to anything that's naturally good for you.
But I guess it's the way a lot of people do it these days. They get these problems from doing it wrong and then kind of treat the symptom instead. The symptom is low testosterone. I just inject it instead of fixing the thing, so that you just naturally produce it again. And that's why I tell clients and stuff that a lot of people you know, we've talked about this too, the responsibility. People like to take responsibility for the good things that happen to them, but not so much the bad things. And so everyone is like, it comes with age. Like, oh, it's of course, since I got older. And it's like, I always would be like, I mean, to some extent, that your body is going to fight you more, in a sense, the older you get. But a lot of it is just due to lifestyle. Like, you know, the old people walking around, like, needing this, you know, you're not doomed to get there. You know?
Exactly.
It's just due to inactivity, really, or that you can't even stand up on your own. You know?
So it's actually quite interesting that in terms of neurology, when people stop moving is when they start degrading, right? Because movement equals life, right? Like life in the sea, if you believe in evolution, which you probably should, is like, that's when it started moving, it started gathering resources and started to grow. So neurology in humans is dependent largely on movement. If you stop moving, the gray matter in your brain starts shrinking, right? And this is like, who takes responsibility for rapid aging? Right? And if that's the whole thing, like social proof is such a double-edged blade. And that's what I thought as well. Like now I'm 31 and like, but when I was, I don't know, like 12
I
or
missed the game
14. No, but that, like all the social proof is like 30-year-olds they have families and they're boring and like they're blah 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 and old, right? And then like now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, oh shit. Like none of that stuff. I mean, the families and stuff like it can be correct, but it just doesn't need to be a process of degradation, right? Because people look at like 40 and you go past your peak.
Of course, it would be great. I mean, I would be happy if I was a dad already, but, you know, I haven't ended up there yet. But you don't have to be the kind of, because I know what you mean. I know these guys that are kind of like, I don't know, old men in a sense.
For sure. But they let themselves get old. Right? And
this is that we're still like full of energy and playful. And
exactly. And that's the social proof thing, right? A lot of people think that aging is, well, I mean, to be a little morbid and precise, it's literally a death sentence at the end of it. But it doesn't need to be one, like in your 30s, in your 40s, like at no given stage until you draw your last breath, you can be vital and strong and healthy.
Like you can both increase, of course, the quantity of your life, like the actual length, chronological length, like that, but especially the quality of it. It's nothing like the half of it. You're gonna have all these aches and pains.
Exactly. So it was actually like.
I'm glad you started talking about this because that was also the one thing. Why is movement so important?
Okay. But I actually want to like highlight that with the example. So you could go like, movement's not that important. But on the fundamental of neurology, coming back to that, right? So one of the best illustrations of this, and I just think it's so fascinating, is that there's something called a sea squirt, which is like a sort of a sponge type jellyfish that moves through the sea, right? The ocean. And it just, eats small stuff, basically. But once it attaches itself to a reef where like the blood, like not the blood flow, the flow of these, like whatever he eats, right? The resources are abundant. The first thing it does is eat its own brain. Because it no longer needs to hunt. It no longer needs to move. So it literally eats its own rudimentary, very basic nervous system. That's the first thing it does. Attaches to the rock and like, I don't need this nervous system brain anymore. I'm just going to eat that because I keep getting fed from this environment. I no longer need to hunt for my food. I no longer need to move. That's why movement is important. And I'll go slightly further, and I'm sure that you've heard that, but other people have said that to me. And they'll always, not always, but they'll regularly say like, you have just changed a dependency, right? Like, now you're no longer like, dependent on, drugs and alcohol and porn and shit like that. You've just used exercise as something you're dependent on.
Then that's like the biggest cope I ever heard.
But it's like, listen, movement isn't really external to you. Because if you take that away, the degradation is clear, right? Like I just said on a neurological level. The intention matters. If you're using it self-destructively, then it's a cope, right? Then becomes destructive towards you, your habits, everything.
I want you to listen to this, G. We had this talk kind of.
Yeah. And this is like where, like, if you use the right intention, right? Movement is medicine, but it's not even that it's just healing, it's a part of you.
Yeah.
If you don't move, like I said, then your brain starts degrading. So it's not something external to you. You're not relying on something external.
No.
It's just, this is what you would do naturally. If we would take you out into the wild, right? I mean, for me, most of Sweden is wild when I think about it, right? It's just forests.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, now survive. What are you going to do? Like, most likely you'll start foraging and hunting.
Yeah.
It's based on movements.
Yeah.
You need to move.
Yeah, you can't just sit around and...
No, like, wait for, God to, like, where's my moose or whatever.
Exactly.
But so, like, anyone that says, like, oh, you're using that as, like, an external thing, it's not the case.
I mean, not as an external thing. And I mean, I guess there are those who... That's that balance again.
Exactly.
Of course, you can move too much.
Yeah, for sure.
But, No. I guess I wanted to... It's harder to make more... like narrow down or whatever, but I wanted to do the simple question also why good nutrition is so important.
Yeah.
Like maybe, if you think about it this way, what is the difference between, for instance, when you had your shit diet and the way you eat now? What will the difference kind of be?
So I already brought up inflammation, right? And inflammation disrupts everything in the body because inflammation in the body is also stress, right? So remember what I said about the brain and stress? That stands true. Right? Any inflammation or most inflammation in the gut above a certain level becomes neuroinflammation. There's direct connections from your gut to the brain. Your lymphatic system is one of them. So a lot of inflammation lands up in the brain. Another thing, right? So first is like what you eat becomes a part of you. Fundamentally, the fats you eat become the fat membranes of the cells. It becomes your brain. It becomes the sheathing of the nervous system. Right, it becomes your skin, right? All of these things, all cells, right? There's like a different cycle for different tissues, but what you eat becomes you. Each thing you eat also carries genetic information. Each thing you eat tells your epigenetics, turn this on, turn that off. So with each meal, you literally tell yourself, I want to adapt towards this direction or that direction. So there isn't any real homeostasis in the body. There isn't staying the same. It doesn't exist. It exists in the micro space of time. Right this moment, it seems like I'm in homeostasis, but I'm not. There is no stasis. You're either progressing, growing, or you're breaking down, decaying. Right? And this is the same with the food. It's either constructive, it either turns on the right shit and turns off the right stuff, or it turns on the wrong stuff and it turns off the right stuff. Right? And this is what people don't understand. Like anything you put in your mouth tells the epigenetics what it needs to do. So and in this case, you have full responsibility what you put in your mouth. You can't control that.
Yeah.
Nobody's force-feeding you like a duck, right? That wants to get a fat liver. So nobody has a gun to your head, I hope, when you're eating. So this is like, nutrition is important because, and I talked about that before in the beginning with people with autism, but it's not about autism only. It's about that everything in terms of like vitamins and minerals is what will make up not just your brain, your tissues, but your hormones as well, right? So hormones can't be synthesized without certain minerals and vitamins, right? And a lot of the feel-good, like, so serotonin and dopamine need...
Be a little careful with bopping.
Oh yeah, sorry. So both dopamine and serotonin need B vitamins. A lack of B vitamins will generally, and in a high degree, become a neurological deficit. And this doesn't need to be like, something big, but it can be depression. It can be anxiety, right? It can manifest itself as such because your brain is literally lacking these nutrients, right? So like, again, like what you eat becomes you, and you either give your body what it needs, and if you don't give it what it needs, it will tell you in various expressions like, hey, something's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very good summary like that. And it's so funny because I could not grasp what this meant really when I was, you know, when I heard it was actually a commercial from some kind of, what is it called? You know, hard bread like this.
Knäckebröd.
Yes, yeah. And I remember, Vasa, du blir vad du äter. You become what you eat.
Yeah,
and as a kid, I was, you know, a little literal, a little autistic like that. Like, I don't become a sandwich, you know, but yeah, of course, this will be the building blocks for you.
Yes.
And it's so funny how a lot of people will be like, they wouldn't pour some kind of cheap fuel in their car, or like, no, don't get that dirt over my stuff kind of thing. And then a bunch on the chips and all that. You're putting pure shit fuel into the one biological vehicle they've been given this life. So
exactly.
Shame on you. No, but that's the thing too, since you say you have control over this. Like with fairness, you know, it is for some people, for the trauma they experienced, it's just a coping mechanism they took on, right?
Yes.
The case for you, for instance.
Oh, yeah. So, like, my big thing was emotional eating, for sure, right? So I was eating to cover up, and, like, eating my feelings, basically, as I always say, because the trauma that I experienced with my dad, it was just, it was the easiest thing to have, or it is the most accessible thing you have access to, right? And then, it just kind of abused that to that degree, unknowingly, and intuitively then, right? Because you get the dopamine from it and the feedback loop starts, right? And that kind of like ties into what we said before with the reward systems and the bacteria adapting. So you lose that sense of control when a lot of this, when the physiology becomes dysfunctional, let's say, right? So both the axis in the brain that deals with stress, the reward centers, the bacteria, and all the other stuff. Yeah. So it's to kind of come back to something I say often on the channel, that it's not that you ended up where you are. It's not necessarily all your fault, but now it is your responsibility. Yeah, like as soon as you become aware, it becomes your responsibility to address that.
Yeah, and maybe you won't be perfect to be able to do it like that.
No, not at all. Like it takes time, right? Because the nature of physiology is as such that it works in the spectra of time always, right? There's short-term adaptations and changes, but you need to think way further. It's the medium term and the long term in this process that will give you the most benefit, and where the change, actually the most profound change will occur. It's from the medium term into the long term, because your brain is plastic, right? It will it will largely rewire, but the rest of your physiology is as well. Like you can heal fatty livers, you can, change your organs, right? Like for the better, I mean, right? Like heal them. Yeah. So your gut, right?
Change them, just swap them out.
Yeah, just swap them out. Yeah. Can I get a new liver, please? I don't need a new liver. But anyway, right? So all of these things occur. Yeah. But don't expect that to happen in 3 months. No. Right? Look at that in the long term.
But it's also, that's also when people want the fast results. Like where you are right now, did that happen because you went to McDonald's for a week?
Yeah, exactly.
No, not really. It's a lifetime of doing this way too much. So there's a bunch of, I would love to get into like trauma and overcoming that, but now we have some time still. One last word before I'm gonna ask you just a few, like give your quick takes on a few things, but more of the philosophical nature. Yeah, but one thing I want you to explain to my audience is why is it okay that I drink so much coffee and that I use the snus, tobacco, nicotine?
So one of these things is, and guys, I'm getting into this, so it's not a perfect explanation.
I'm sure you'll do fine.
I'll do my best. So in neurology, you have different types. And meaning that, like, if somebody's dominant in their left brain or in their right brain has a lot to do with how they respond to certain things. And that's even temperature. Like, somebody that's more right brain, I'm not, again, sure about the specifics, right? Like, I was, right? Like, or I guess I am more right dominant. I'm balancing that out, right? So that it gets better. Yeah. But anyway, so for somebody like Daele that is trending more on the left side, he'll have the stimulants to kind of, and this is quite typical in ADD, right? Because that's like something that you've contended with. That's much better. But where actually stimulants, and that's why they kind of give you a stimulant, right? When you're on it, is to narrow the focus of their brain, right? So it changes the chemistry as such that it allows certain parts of the brain and certain networks to work in a certain way, right? Because it become very like chaotic and distracted, basically.
Yep.
And the stimulants dial that in. So if the brain, the brain is always balancing itself technically, and that's a way to do it intuitively. It's the way his brain is wired, and there's definitely something genetic going on with you and caffeine tolerance, right? Because we're very different like that.
Yeah. It's funny. Well, we have talked about this even before now, but I do the intermittent coffee drinking. I have my espresso shots like throughout up to until lunch basically. I go have them every now and then. I don't like keep track of it. I just intuitively kind of do it. I can't really tell what the effect is. And this was, by the way, the first time I tried coffee when I was like 14, 15. I didn't know that I felt anything from it, you know. And so I just know that I like it for some reason. Something is nice about it, but I can't describe the feeling at all. And then you have Sim. It was like yesterday when we were out in the city and we grab a coffee. And he has been like drinking. It's so big. And I was like, yeah, I guess, you know. And he's been drinking half of it. And he's like, do you want the rest of mine? I'm getting like anxious. Can we get up and move? And I'm like, seriously? Because I've never. It's not that I drink so much coffee that I have a high tolerance. You know, I've never had that experience.
Exactly. So that's part of the probably a genetic thing, but definitely the brain balance. Right, and that's it's really interesting because that's how his brain just balances out, and it doesn't because you've been on and off coffee, you've cycled through it.
Yeah, I will do my fasts. From it.
Exactly, right? Because then we have good data on him on how it affects him and his sleep. Because if we were like, it takes coffee away and his sleep improves greatly, then
and that would definitely be enough for me to go off it. But the sleep doesn't really improve when I go off it.
Right? So this isn't like we haven't tested his genetics, but then
we will though.
We will, Then there's a really high probability that his genetic predisposition for high metabolizing or high caffeine tolerance is there. Right? Both the tolerance and the metabolization of it.
And so another quick one that the way we differ is that I'm very envious of this, that Sim will just at night, I'm always like passing out. And you will go to bed and just pass out like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And for me, that's, ever since I was a kid, it's just not something I ever experienced. If I feel like that, it's because I'm severely sleep deprived. So I kind of always have to be like, I could be up and do a bunch of stuff right now, but I kind of just have to go to bed. And this is one of those things, guys, when, it's taking responsibility. Like, you still have to acknowledge, it would be stupid for me to I should be able to be like that, because I literally am not. I've never been like that. But that doesn't mean, like the way I used to treat it is like, it's difficult with me, for me with sleep, so I'll just, be up late. I don't go out to get the sunlight and all this. Of course, it's just a lot worse. So where it ends up being now is like, I will have to take some more time to fall asleep. It's usually not like that. But when I do my shit on point, I go to get the sunlight, I move a lot and all this, and I actually go to bed on time. It takes a bit longer, but it's actually all right like that. So, Yeah,
exactly. Like that's definitely, your neurology at play.
It's fascinating this with, acknowledging some things I can't really change. I can't become the person who just becomes sleepy at night, but I still take as much responsibility as I can to do the best I can.
100%.
Okay, so a few short ones. So, what is a man?
Oh, shit. So, I made this formula, and I can't remember it from the top of my head.
The Chad formula.
The Chad formula, if you will. Right? But a part of it, I'll start with this, right? What is a man? A man is someone who does the right thing when he needs to do it, whether he feels like it or not. If you never do the right thing, you're of no use for yourself and others, right? Because you could have the beard, you could have the gains, right? You could have the girl, whatever. But if your values aren't there, if you don't have any principles, if you never do the right thing, then that's not very masculine. You're not serving yourself, and you're definitely not serving others.
No, I like that answer. I am not going to, no further questions.
Cool.
So, do you believe in God?
Yeah, in a way, right? So my version of God is that I believe that the universe is sentient.
Mm-hmm.
And for people, like, sentient doesn't mean conscious.
Mm-hmm.
It's different. Like, I believe that the universe is alive. And that has many different reasons, but I believe it has a driving sentience. Meaning that there's, like we talked about, there's randomness.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's, like, something that's a driving force. And I believe that sentience is the driving force, and I believe that's like my version or my conceptualization of God.
Yeah. No, I like that, because in a way, why I love saying God too is because I used to be such a cringy atheist, you know, and like, where's the proof of God? And really thinking about it, this has to be this guy sitting on top of the clouds and being like, you know, but it's of course just a synonym for the higher power, nature, the truth, love, all these things are synonyms to me. But it's I have that personal attachment like that I like to, because I changed my view on it so much. I really like to be like God and call it Him, and you know. So I love that, and also it does provoke the shit out of atheists, which I love.
It's a good bonus.
Oh, I that video. It was last summer, and I did that video, why atheists' brains are too big, but it got corrupted. I guess I'm going to have to redo it. I like that one.
It will be even better this time.
Yeah, I think so. Level up. Deeper connection to God. Yeah, and so we've touched, I guess this can be kind of a last question. We've mentioned Stoicism, but you're very much into philosophy and Stoicism and all the Greek shit. So, like, just talk a bit about that. You love to write poetry and stuff too, but what's your view on Stoicism, really?
Like, my view on Stoicism is that it's a really good model for behavior and navigating, I would say navigating laws, but it's not even that. It's just navigating life. Yeah. Right? So
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah. And if you look at it, like, guys, like, if you're, religious or in religion, and I don't mean institutionalized religion, I mean actual religion, meaning that, like, what was written, and even if we disregard the written word, what was perpetuated was a code of conduct, a way of life. So philosophy back in the day and now, embodied through us, right, is a way of life. It's just a way of navigating things. Why Stoicism is because its expression as a Western thought was really easy to understand, right? And I maybe some people here have heard or read Eastern philosophy, and that expression is very typical for that period in time and that society. It was way more poetic. Right, so it's not necessarily meant to be taken literal. Some things can, of course, but not all of it, right? And it kind of, I feel quite often, right, that for people in the West, there's that disconnect and that resistance to Eastern philosophy. But when you compare Zen Buddhism or Buddhism and Stoicism, it's the same. Yeah. It's basically literally the same. It's just the expression that differs. Yeah, it's so funny because I've never really gotten into reading a bunch of all of this, but not like with any religion really, or Stoicism or philosophy. But with things I say that I feel like I come up with this, it's just something I kind of intuitively know, figured out from my experiences. I will get these comments like, "Oh, that reminds me of Buddhism or Christianity or Stoicism." It doesn't matter. And I'm like, I'm sure, Yeah, because like what they aimed to describe and to offer as a like working model, right, is a fundamental truth. And like I use that very deliberately because if it wasn't a fundamental truth, it wouldn't come back over the ages in different expressions. Then like this is the things that would fade out. Exactly. But they don't fade out, right? So they must be fundamentally true. And true enough to stand the test of time. Stoicism is all the shit, right? It's written before the Bible, guys. Imagine that, right? So you have these types of texts that precede, lots of religious texts, just like the Bible. But then all these different things would come back in other either religious texts or ideological texts, right? So then they must have come to fundamental truth and conclusions on how to navigate this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing we've also talked about, how the truth will always come out in the end.
Yes.
It's a similar thing. Like these things, they all tap into the same fundamental truths.
Yeah.
And so it's a slightly different expression each time, but yeah, there's something real there.
Yeah, for sure. And this is... the connections that I made was by reading, like I got into Eastern philosophy first, then I got into Stoicism and Greek philosophy, which you could call Western philosophy, sort of. And then it was just kind of apparent, like, oh, they're all talking about the same thing. Weird. And it wasn't weird until you start digging into this and understanding that they just want to talk about the same stuff because everybody deals with the same stuff. Right? And yeah. I've just kind of used that as a working model for my life. And like, I just like writing about it.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, why I like writing about it is because so many people are disconnected, not necessarily from the fundamental truths in and of themselves, but they don't have the model or they don't have a connection, a resource. And for a lot of people in my environment, I'm that source or resource for these philosophical, not just fundamental truths, but how to think about them, how to navigate these. And then on top of that, yeah, like a working model for the world. Right? And I think that's really important, because if you work with a bad model of the world, you keep making the same mistakes, right? It needs an update.
Yeah, and this is really what my belief in God is about, that there is a fundamental truth. And like you talk about this now, but there's even in our day now when also more people can get the chance to just, I don't know, reach out to people with their social media and stuff, with their just view on things, really. And so one example I bring up is like Jesse Lee Peterson. This I haven't followed him much lately, but I really like his message. And he's this old black conservative American Republican fellow, you know, and it's not necessarily for the politics that I tuned into him. It's more the call-ins from people and just life stuff, you know. But then we have, on the other hand, this guy Wes Watson, super jacked, super ripped, angry prison dude who used to be a super violent criminal, you know, and changed his ways. And on the surface, they're so different. And the way they express themselves, like he's yelling, high energy, like, and Jesse, like, oh, chill, laid back. But if you see what the message is about, it's the same things. They're tapping into that same fundamental truths. Like the example with, like, don't trust the thoughts, don't trust the feelings. You have to, you know, connect to a higher value. The kind of these things. Yeah, it's so cool. And this is like this is the proof of God for me, that these same things just end up coming up in the end.
Yeah, you connect to the same thing, as we're all connected to the same thing, the one thing, right?
Exactly.
That life force, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So I think that's a kind of good place to end it, a kind of natural. And you're gonna get the chance to tell people where to find this stuff. But is there any last thing you'd like to bring up, or?
Not really. I think we covered it at length.
Yeah. I'm very happy about this talk. So same. Let's let people know where they can find you and follow you and all that.
It's basically just Instagram, or like Twitter as well, but like
your main channel.
Yeah, my main channel is Instagram, especially for the philosophical and the learning more about biology and neurobiology or neuropsychobiology.
And so your handle there is
Sim Vandale, so SIMVANDAELE.
Yeah, I'll put it all in the description, of course. Is it the same on Twitter?
Yeah, it's the same on Twitter. Yeah.
I guess you have a YouTube channel, but maybe not quite as active lately.
No, I'm not as active, and I don't think, like, there won't be any like grand return. I don't have any plans, so I'm gonna like focus on some different things for now.
But I think you should at some point. But we'll see.
Maybe,
I'll attract, don't chase that thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, brother, it's been a great talk. Great talk.
It's really been my pleasure.
Thank you so much. Of course. Yeah. Okay, let's go get some food or something.
Yeah.